Let's go ahead and call this public hearing to order. As you know, the City Council has established by ordinance a Historic Preservation Commission, and the Commission has recommended a particular district for commercial properties that would be included in that. This is not residential properties, but commercial properties only, and also establish some guidelines for their consideration. And the purpose of this hearing is to receive any input that the citizens may want to make regarding the recommendations that's been made by the Historic Preservation Commission. So has everyone that wishes to speak signed up, or is there anyone else who will okay. What's that? Well, you can sign in this one, and if you want to speak in the public input period in the next meeting, you're welcome to do that as well. Okay. Let me go ahead and get those who are on here, and then those others that wish to speak will go with that as well. Okay. All right. First person, and once again, this is not where we're going to get into any kind of debate here tonight. Okay, on this issue. But we do want to hear from you and see what your concerns or maybe your support for it or lack of support for it. We just want to know where you're coming from. So the first person is Harry Cooper.
Thank you. First thing let me say is I've lived here about 15 years and I've loved every minute of it. And I live on Main Street, on corner of Dr. John Pettit and Main Street. Most of you know my wife. She's lived there about 40 years. And I'm happy. I like it. We travel a lot. We get home and I get this in the mail, and I don't know what's changing. You know, periodically we come and we go, and we've had the previous administration, there was some problems with center city development or something, and they had to rezone everything then. But anyway, I just got a concern is what is the benefit that me as a homeowner are going to derive from this change of venue or whatever we want to call it, rezoning, and how will this affect me? That's my only concern is I just want to know what's the good and what's the bad. You know, what are we going to get out of it? Is there a benefit, or are we just going to lose something?
Well, I appreciate it. We're not really, we just want to hear that's a concern
well,
that you
that's
have.
what I want to know. I like it the way it is. If we're looking for a vote, I say I'm happy the way it is. I'm not interested in changing anything.
Okay. Let me just reemphasize, this does not affect residential properties.
All right. Well, but let me ask you something. Where I live, next door to me is the Tribune. That's a commercial property. Across the street from me is 23 and a half an hour lock. That's commercial property.
Commercial, yes.
Next to that is, I don't know, it could be a beauty shop, spa. Yeah. Across the street from me is a lawyer's office. Two houses down is a lawyer's office. Caddy corner from me is a multiplex apartment complex. So I guess I'm residential, but really I'm commercial.
Yeah.
So, you know, am I commercial or am I residential?
We will be discussing this in our next meeting.
Okay.
And
well, I just didn't understand.
I can't promise, but we may get you an answer at that point.
Great. That's
okay.
Super. That's all I wanted to know. I just didn't understand what was happening.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Harry Johnston.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Harry Johnston. I am a member of the HPC, and I just thought I'd give you my 2 cents worth and ask you to consider. Biggest single misconception that the mayor has already attempted to address is that this is for commercial properties only. My understanding is if you live there, it's not it wouldn't affect it. I guess there are possible dual purpose properties where you could live and also serve as a business. But for the most part, if you're living there, this ordinance does not propose to affect it. So really, to get to the substance of it, even if it's not as big a burden as some people might think, sure, it's a burden on an individual property owner, another restriction on an individual property owner. And my thought, and I'm sure it's in your mind too, is you don't want to impose any additional restriction on property owners unless it's worth it. So there's the question, is it worth it? And you look at it from the individual property owner's perspective, and certainly they're going to say, well, gee, I don't want any more burdens. Sure, I'm happy if all my neighbors maintain the historic character of the neighborhood. That's what I really want, but I don't really want to be saddled with anything. So the question is it for the common good? Are we better off with it than without it? We've lost some buildings over my lifetime that I look back and I just think we would treasure those today if we had them. The old Canton Hotel. What if we still had that? Wouldn't that be just a jewel of downtown Canton? And others. We've thankfully saved the school complex. That's a huge win, but we've lost others, and we risk losing still others. We still have a great many beautiful historic buildings in Canton. Not just that we would lose the buildings in their entirety, but their character by renovations that wouldn't be historically appropriate. So the question is, would it make Canton, downtown Canton, a more thriving community? Would it help in that regard? Would it help preserve and enhance property values? Would it actually improve the quality of life of the people who live in and use the downtown community? And certainly I think the answer to all three of those questions is absolutely yes. So in my mind, yes, while it is some burden to the individual property owner, it is worth it, and that's really the key. The other thing I want to mention is that there's got to be judgment involved, clearly. And then whose judgment will it be? Well, ultimately, it's your judgment. If a property owner wants to make a change and they bring that change to the HPC, and HPC says no or gives it back to them in such a way that's unacceptable to them, they have the opportunity to come to you and appeal. And I'm sure that's going to happen over the course of this thing. And when it does, I think that's your way of giving guidance back to the HCP to make sure, HPC, to make sure that they get the idea and get in line. One of the values and judgments I think we have to make, and you have to make, is, for instance, does the building have economic value? Does it have historical value? That's really what it's all about. You can't preserve everything. Everything can't be a museum. If a structure doesn't have some value, some economic value, then I myself would not vote to prohibit its demolition or its reconstruction to make it have some economic value. Now, in doing so, or if it's replaced with another structure, we would ask, and I think that's what we're all about here, is to try to make it as historically and aesthetically compatible with the downtown area as possible. But certainly, we're going to need judgment. The ordinance probably has some provisions that are going to cause some rough edges as we go forward, and I suspect after some experience with it, we and you are going to want to make some changes to it. But that's just the way it goes with anything that's new like this. So I'd ask you to approve it, work out the rough edges as we go. I don't think they'll be as great as some people believe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Stephanie Joyner.
Good evening, Mayor and Council, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I would echo what Mr. Johnson just talked about too. This really isn't that scary a process. When somebody pulls a permit to make a change to their building, they're already going through some design review already. This may be an extra step, but it may be in a lot of those that the staff can approve them, and they don't need to go to the HPC. In fact, if you ask the permitting department, they haven't received a permit in the past year that would fall under this committee. It's only if someone is going to make material changes to the exterior of their building. And if they do, then the HPC is there to help them maybe choose the right choices, if they, to make it historically compatible. This process is going to be important now that we have new buildings coming into downtown. We found that with the school buildings. This committee can help guide those new buildings to make sure that they are compatible. Doesn't mean we can't have a modern structure, just that some of their design choices will need to have some historic elements to it, that they be the same, you know, the same exterior brick, that they have the same ratio of door and window openings that maybe their neighbors do, things like that, that again, don't prohibit having a modern building, but let's just make it fit into our historic downtown, and that's what this is designed to do. It's taking a design review based on a historic standpoint, because if we all admit that's what our downtown is. It is very historic, and I think it is important for us to keep those elements. And that's really, you know, all I want to say is that, you know, that this is designed to help protect property owners' investments in their building. Make sure their neighbor keeps their building the way it's supposed to be, or if they're going to make modifications to it, that they make it where it keeps up the neighborhood, you know, so to speak. But the Historical Society certainly supports it and appreciates all of you taking it on, and the HPC members for donating their time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Walker.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak before you. I really would like to speak and converse with you, but I think that's at the next meeting. As a owner of a building that falls within this boundary, I kind of, and that's been restored and gone through the processes of restoration in the city, dealing with a complete exterior rebuild and a complete interior rebuild. I know what that entails, dealing with the city and going through the permitting department and doing the work and whatnot. I caution the council and the mayor from the standpoint of the duplication of what we're already doing from the building department side. We're already taking steps that preserve, and I'm all for historic preservation. I've been involved in, you know, the preservation of the downtown theater. Many of the buildings downtown I've worked at or in, and I'm all for that. I just think this brings another layer of bureaucracy in the process of a future business owner, a current business owner, a current property owner, from the standpoint of, if I have to wait 45 days to do something to my building or to do something to the exterior of someone else's building in the commercial district, I think it's going to possibly tamp down some of the folks that might want to take on some changes, because they're not sure of what the city's going to do. They're not sure what the historic preservation folks are going to say about it, and they're not sure of the guidelines that actually fit the district. Currently, we have a very good process. We probably have a little too good process. And it's my understanding this has already been written into the code, and what the council will be voting on tonight is just the boundary for the existing code that's already been approved. Can you answer that?
Billy, is that absolutely correct? I'm not sure that's exactly right. I think it was my understanding that what we're looking at, that we're discussing tonight, is both the boundary and the guidelines.
That's correct.
That are recommended by the Historic Preservation Commission. All we adopted was the implementation of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Correct.
We set up the commission, and then they actually have defined a district that they're recommending and the guidelines that they're recommending to us.
Okay, so this is not a part of the current Uniform Development Code, is that correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, I've been told different
Both ways?
Different things, and I think I might have approached it different if I'd known that. But what this basically, the letter that we received talks about the boundary. It doesn't necessarily talk about the guidelines. So I think I might have looked at it a little bit differently if I knew that the development codes were actually up for tonight. I'd just like to ask the council to understand that the current Unified Development Code, does anybody have an idea of how many pages are in that?
Whole lot, I know, whole lot.
Anybody want to guess? Almost 700, that's correct. Almost 700 pages. So when somebody comes to the city and they're looking to, build, do improvements or whatever, we've got almost 700 pages of development code out there now. And I'm not sure how many more pages this is going to add to it, but obviously it's going to increase it probably by a good margin. We currently take the steps, I think, to do all the things, and I think we've done it in a different way. I think there was an oversight committee that met and discussed a lot of these similar things. Now I think we're shifting that from the oversight committee, and that committee is going to be disbanded, or will they continue, or will they have two committees to review these things in the downtown area? That's just questions, and it's just, like I say, I think it's just a lot. I think the 45-day period for approval is considerable. I'd like to hope that the city would be very friendly in attracting business and attracting people that want to do things downtown, but I just ask that you make consideration of those things. I don't know where we've done something wrong. Currently, using our current development codes and current building codes, I don't see any big boo-boos out there in downtown that make me think, oh, well, we need to add this, because if we don't, this is going to happen. Because I don't see anything like that happen. The one thing I will say that's off this is if you'll take a ride up Highway 5 going south and look at the mess that's on both sides of the street there, if you'll look at the intersection of 140 where it comes into Marietta Road, what a mess we have there. I would like for the council to spend a little bit more time and attention to those areas that are just, eyesores for the city, and as opposed to just downtown. I like the attention downtown, but we've got a lot of areas in Canton that need addressing. Thank you.
Thank you. Tammy Pace.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Tammy Pace. We own the property at 890 East Main Street, where Pace Drywall is located. And a couple of things I want to say is obviously that we're in the historic district. I also live, in addition to working in the downtown Canton area, I also live there. So, and I enjoy the character of our downtown, and I do appreciate the efforts to preserve the historic character of our community. And also want to say that, despite any of my comments, I want to thank the folks who have been willing to volunteer and spend their time to be on the Preservation Committee, because I know that is a time taken away from their own lives, that they are willing to commit to our community. Excuse me, I have a little cough I can't get rid of. But I do have a couple of questions. And I know we're not doing back and forth, so let me just lay things out there that have come to my mind that you may or may not have thought of. Enforcement of the Historic Preservation Committee. Who is to be in charge with enforcing that folks who do maintain their properties or do something to their properties have gotten a letter? What is the penalty if they don't? How long will the letter be valid once it's received? And so these are some things that I question about. I think that we already have some stretched resources on our police department side. I know our police department is already trying to do most of our ordinance enforcement as it is. I've had an air conditioner stolen off the side of my home. So I realize that we have to be cautious, and I hope that you'll be cautious of stretching some of the resources that we already have, maybe even thinner. And I also say that the city council is city council for probably one of the fastest growing cities in the state of Georgia at this time. So I also think that you should consider, as well as what you're able to take on as far as the city council in regards to maintaining and managing the Historic Preservation Commission. These are things I would like for you to think about. I think that in addition to the Preservation Commission, I think I see the overall vision, which is to try to preserve the historical character of our community. I think currently, though, the ordinance might delve a little bit too deep into maintenance items. I think that if you look at it, what I understood from the last meeting is it could include sod, it can include painting your home, it can include putting an awning on your property. I don't see the historical significance of the sod at my property. So I think maybe it's delving a little bit too deep into things that are probably just random maintenance items that most folks don't want to spend the time or the energy to wait 45 days to ask a commission if they can do it. We're involved in the construction industry. I can tell you that if a painter shows up and says, I'm ready to paint today, you do not want to turn him away and say, give me 45 more days. If you need your property painted, most folks want to paint their properties. Also, we're also talking about commercial properties, which are primarily small business owners. Small business owners are extremely taxed. We're already juggling 15, 20 things at one time. So I think he would like you to consider how involved you're going to get with this ordinance in regards to items that probably are not significant to the overall character of the community, that would not be relevant to the time of the property owner or the city council, if that makes any sense. I think that the judgment calls seem a little bit ambiguous to me at this point in regards to if I am going to add an awning to a property, who gets to say if that design is going to be sufficient for our downtown? I think there's going to be some ambiguities, especially initially on whose desk that crosses and whether it passes one person and it doesn't pass another. So I think some design issues would need to be settled out. And as Mr. Johnson mentioned, I think there's going to be some rough edges. But should the ordinance be implemented and then the rough edges worked out at the expense of the property owners and the city council, or should it be maybe the rough edges a little bit ironed out before the ordinance gets completely implemented? I think that is really all the comments that I wanted to make. Those were my concerns about the ordinance that exists.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bill Staub.
Good evening. Myself and my wife, Patty Ball, we live in the city of Canton, and we own a commercial building downtown. We think that the Historic Commission and the ability to preserve historic buildings is really a good idea. I haven't really read it yet, so I can't speak out of intelligence. But my concern would be things like if there's a residential building that's really considered historic, and there are some in Canton, does that fall under the guidelines? What I saw said only commercial buildings. The other question is buildings that are used as rental houses or boarding houses, are they going to fall under the guidelines? Are they commercial? Are they going to be required to have upkeep and those type things? And how do you classify them? Who classifies the commercial buildings? So, you know, we'd like to see everything kept up in the city of Canton. The other question is, and we thought about buying some other buildings. Suppose there's a building in that area that needs to be demolished just because it's not structurally sound, you couldn't remodel it. It would cost more to try to rehab it than just to tear it down and build a new structure. If it's not going to be a commercial building, how are the guidelines applied? If it's going to be a residential building, for instance, if we wanted to build a house in the historic district, or if you're going to rebuild a commercial building on that lot, how is it going to apply? What are you going to use for guidelines for architectural? I will tell you in the past 8 years I've been involved in rehabbing a building in downtown Canton and building a new structure inside the city. And Crosby and his guys Mark Crosby, they do a really good job. I mean, the permitting process that I went through is very, very thorough. I had done subdivisions inside Cherokee County back in the 90s, and it wasn't that thorough. And years ago, I rehabbed houses in Buckhead in the city of Atlanta, and I wasn't impressed with their process either. So I'll just tell you, based on experience, that I think Mr. Crosby does a good job. So I hope whatever you do is going to be to keep the character of downtown Canton. Some of the older buildings, I know some of the nice buildings up on East Main, the brick ones that they just remodeled, did a good job. Almost like it to look like Noonan, Georgia, if you've ever driven into Noonan and seen the historic homes down there. So again, I need to read the ordinance, but that's just our input. Thank you.
Thank you. Roy Taylor.
Good evening. I support historic renovation. I've been a part of it for all of my professional career. I have been a part of at least 7 nationally accredited preservation projects that are large commercial projects, and well as one of the few that is in Cherokee County that is on the records. I was a part of that process. I don't believe that we are ready to pass this ordinance now. We have not taken advantage of this as an opportunity with which to look at the processes that we go through for our building permits, our design review, and some of the other zoning issues such as signs that has an overlap with this ordinance. And how, by taking on this as an additional review process, we might be able to reduce some of the other review processes that are currently in place so that it doesn't have to be reviewed as the sign for a sign ordinance and then have to come before the historic group to be able to get a sign that's a historic sign. Why can't that be worked as something where that process is combined? Same thing going with the design guidelines. We shouldn't have to necessarily go through a design guideline and then have to go through a historic design guideline. And in that way, we would be able to make things happen and work out some of the issues that developers that we're trying to attract to the downtown, that we're going through the process of putting this downtown master plan together, that we are trying to be able to be attractive. It ought to be easy. It should not necessarily be seen as an onerous extra thing that we're doing on top of all of the things that we're doing now. The design guidelines. You have 2 items on your agenda before you this evening. One has to do with the borders with which that we're creating this district. I am sure there were reasons why they chose some of the lines. I am not clear why down off of West Marietta Street that one of the properties that we own that's part of the 3, it was the old Must building. It's a concrete block building that was a great industrial thing that was built to be able to, or used in part of the chicken business here in Cherokee County for years with Mr. Buchanan, and did well to serve the city as Must Ministries. It is not of historic significance, and so I'm not quite sure, even though it's old enough, why it would be included as part of the boundaries with which. It's not a contributing factor to the historic things, and so that, but that's up to others for making the decisions around how those borders got. And I think those should be answered, but I don't need an answer directly back from that. What I want to speak more specifically is the ordinance to adopt the historic district design guidelines. Those guidelines have not been made available to the public in any easy manner. We were promised last meeting a month ago that they would be on the website. They still are not on the website. So anybody that had questions about what the actual guidelines that are being adopted would be, they don't know unless they've been able to find time to be able to come in to talk with Ken Patton or something. And when I called to be able to talk with Ken Patton, I found that he was out of town for this, for some period of time before this meeting, even until next week sometime. So was not able to get anyone that knew the design guidelines themselves. So nobody's been able to check them. So I don't know if you've been able to check them. I'm hoping that they gave you a printed copy so that you could review these, but the public has not had that opportunity. The process is not defined. We have a 45-day period. There are some things in the ordinance that talk about some of the concerns that came up that had to do with how it's being reviewed and what the recourse would be if you had it. But there's not a clear, this is what the application is going to look like, this is what it's going to cost, this is what the materials that you're going to be expected to present to the commission, how we're going to do this, how soon before the meeting. There are several different things that have been mentioned both at the last meeting, in the print documents, and what I read in the newspaper. We don't know from when I make my application that it's going to be heard. We only hear that it has a limit of 45 days, and if it's not approved within 40 days or denied within 45 days, that it will be accepted. One thing that came up on March 7th was someone thought that maybe they needed 7 days. Their printed material says 15 days, and what was brought up at that meeting was, oh no, it's going to be treated like a zoning change, and it has to be there a month and a day before the month of that meeting. In the paper, it was described that the commission would be convened after an application was made. Not that they were regularly meeting on the third Thursday of the blah, blah. We don't know. So what are you voting for when you get to the point of voting? And I think it would be good for everybody to know these things ahead of time. And so all I'm saying is, let's not be hasty. This is an ordinance that has had a lot of work. The original ordinance to set up a historic commission was last April or May. We've been taking time to develop these documents. Let's get a chance to look at the documents that have been developed. Let's get a sense of how this are. Let's not have as many rough edges to work out afterwards. And I think you've heard that this evening also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that didn't sign in that would like to speak? Be happy to hear from you. Yes. On the historic preservation ordinance. Oh, okay. Wait till the next second meeting from now. We'll let you get in on that one. Okay. Thank you, Patty.
The only thing that I would caution the council to review carefully with your legal counsel is that you run the risk of being arbitrary and capricious when you have guidelines that take human beings to speculate from their own subjective opinion as to what is appropriate. And it has to be uniform across the board if it is going to be constitutionally firm. And that's a hard thing to do. That's the problem that a lot of historic preservation districts have encountered, is the arbitrary and capricious nature of making a decision here and making a different decision here over the same kind of conditions. So I would urge caution over the constitutional ramifications here.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay, well, we will close the public hearing, and we will go into our next meeting, which is not our council meeting, but hopefully this one won't take. What's that? Oh, we got to wait till 6 for the. Second meeting? Oh, okay, never mind. Next one will be at 6 o'clock.
We still gotta wait to 6 because that's when it's advertised for.
Oh, it was? Oh, okay. I thought it was just coming immediately after this. Okay.
Well, that'd be nice.
Okay, we need to go ahead and call our special called meeting to order, please. Now, this is a meeting that will come before our regular council meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss our noise control ordinance. As you may or may not know, the council on March 17th approved a noise control ordinance, which I vetoed on March 24th. And the reason for the veto has been spelled out to the council. The principal reason that I vetoed it was because we have a noise control ordinance now, and it establishes certain work hours and so forth, you know, and you can't, without special permission, you can't work, say, 11 or 12 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning. You have to get special permission from the council. Well, the new ordinance was basically the same. It did add Saturday as a work day was one of the things, which is I had no problem with. But my concern was that it listed some 10 city holidays that would be considered holidays for which a contractor would have to get a permit in order to work on those days. And some of those days were like, of course, Christmas, the basic holidays, and some of them were like the day after Thanksgiving, the day after Christmas, or Christmas. It could potentially be, if Christmas fell on a Saturday, of course, the day after, the following Monday, the contractor would have to get a special permission to work. I just felt like the city established on its own volition those holidays that they wanted, that the city wanted its employees to celebrate, and I felt like that everyone else should be able to decide which holidays they wish to celebrate. And you know, the problem is not, as far as the nuisance goes, the problem is not which day they're working. The problem could be the noise that they're making. If they're generating a disturbance, that's one thing. But just the day after Thanksgiving, you know, I think there's quite a few people that would probably work on that day, you know, and some of the other holidays that are there. And for us to dictate to other people exactly which holidays then seem to be, you know, actually it seemed to be unconstitutional to me. I'm not sure whether we can do that or not. Maybe we can, but I think that the purpose of this meeting is for the council to decide if they wish to override the veto, and if not, we do have a substitute ordinance, actually two of them, I believe, that they can consider, and if they wish to consider those, then we can take those up and discuss them in our next work session, I believe. So, okay, the meeting is open, so I'll entertain any discussion.
Can I make a motion? And then we can discuss it?
Sure.
I'd like to make a motion to sustain your veto. Means that we are going to vote for a new ordinance if this motion passes.
Okay, I don't know whether you need to do that or not. If you, we'll ask our attorney, can you make a motion to sustain it, or just if you don't get a motion, it's sustained?
The veto will stand unless there's a motion and a vote overturning it. So there's no need.
So it doesn't need to be sustained. I don't need the vote.
In order for it would need a motion to override it if it were to be overridden.
Okay, but I guess I'll withdraw it.
Right.
We don't need one.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'll make a comment.
Okay, sure.
I remember, and Pat Gold remembers, a lot of discussion that we had when we went over the charter many years ago, and we wanted very badly to have this mayor's veto in the charter, and there was a lot of people that maybe didn't see the need for it or thought that was a power-grabbing position by the mayor. And bottom line is this, I think on review after the mayor vetoed this, I thought he's absolutely right, and that's why we wanted it in there in the first place. When we act too quickly or don't look at something close enough, I think the reasons for the veto were substantial, and that I am very pleased that the mayor vetoed it. So that's my position. Thank you.
Let me say, of course, there's no ill will at all in this veto, and the veto is in no way a reflection on the council's well-intended efforts, because we do need this, and we have something now. It could be refined, and I think in the proposed ordinances that we'll discuss momentarily here, I think it does that. It satisfies things. So, anyone else have any comments? Or Mr. Grant?
Yes, I concur with the holidays also, as I stated in the last meeting. I don't think we should be mandating holidays that any employer takes. By the same token, I wonder, on that same logic, if we don't tell people they can or cannot work on the holidays that we deem celebratory, can we tell them they can't work on Sundays? I know the county, I think, allows for Sunday, shorter hours on Sunday. I'm not advocating that, because I think there's a fine line between being pro-business and, sustaining the residents' quality of life. And I think the nuisance ordinance, does that and addresses that. I'm glad that we're updating it for that. So that was just my only question. If we're considering, not telling people, what days to celebrate, are we contradicting ourselves by saying they can't do it on Sunday?
Right. Mr. Young.
Well, as I stated in the meeting where we voted, I look at it in the same vein that people are entitled to quiet enjoyment of their home in the evenings and on weekends and Sundays. I believe they're entitled to quiet enjoyment of their home on a holiday when they have one of their rare days off from work where they can spend with their family. So in that vein, I'm in favor of including holidays. But I think the amendments to the ordinance are important enough that it's not a deal breaker at this point. And I understand that we got this list of holidays following the city's official holidays, and which is a good guideline, I think, since it's the city ordinance. But I will go along with whatever the council decides in that vein. But I do believe it is important in the same vein as it is for people to be able to enjoy their homes in the evenings. They should be able to enjoy their homes on a holiday without having nearby construction.
Ms. McGrew?
Thank you. May I address Mr. Peppers?
Sure.
In our last meeting, you explained how the holidays that the city took mandated the holidays in the ordinance, and you gave a very good explanation as to why that was chosen, about staff possibly having to be in the city at work on one of the holidays that the city observes. Would you go through that again for me, please?
Sure. Originally, when the ordinance was drafted to bring to you, the staff was looking at, first of all, that we currently don't allow any work on Saturdays, and that most individuals who are in the private sector can work on a Saturday. So we made that little tweak in there, and in part of our discussion, what we were talking about was, how do we deal with holidays? Are we going to treat a holiday like we would treat a Saturday and a Sunday? A lot of jurisdictions do have some oversight on holidays. Mr. Patton had reviewed cases from across the country on how they dealt with work outside of hours, from big cities to small cities. And what he did is he put together a draft that included the holidays, and on that first brushstroke, he just included all the holidays that the city observes, because that's the easiest one for us to define. That's the one that, as a staff, we're used to. And from our perspective on holidays, part of the reason why we put those in is that, if you do have somebody who's working on that day and they do need an immediate on-site inspection because something's going on, or they've got to get to the next section of a project and they're on a timeline, if they needed to call somebody in, we wouldn't have anybody do an inspection that day because city staff persons on a holiday. I have talked with Mr. Crosby about it, and routinely we have been called out on emergency situations, to go in and check. For instance, if we've had a situation before where a car has driven into a commercial structure, and we have to send somebody out there to check. It doesn't matter what day or time or what have you. We send somebody out to check, and the reason why we do is we want to make sure that that particular structure is safe for the public. It's safe to stay open, and that we're meeting all of our fire codes and things like that if we have to close off an entrance or exit, what have you. Having said that, now looking on it from the staff perspective, if you wish to take the holidays out, I don't think it's going to have a major impact on the staff if we had to come in on an emergency circumstance, because we're having to come in anyways. But the reason why we put those holidays in was just because it conformed with everything else that we were doing.
Let me mention one other thing regarding that. I did contact the city to the north, Ball Ground. I contacted the city to the south, Holly Springs, and I contacted Cherokee County. None of them have holidays listed in their nuisance ordinance or noise ordinance like that. They do. The county does they allow even work on Sunday, and I wasn't advocating that necessarily, but they do allow work on Sunday from 1:30, I believe, till 6:30 or 6 or 6:30. But I wanted to see what they were doing to the north of us, to the south of us, and completely surrounding us, and none of them actually list holidays separately. Ms. Wilson.
Mayor, I want to make a motion to adopt the new ordinance. Is that in order?
Okay. Which new ordinance?
The one that's in our packet, the one that omits the holiday.
Okay. Sure, you can do that.
And let me just say, too, that I understand Mr. Grant saying that Sundays are, some places we should allow them to work on Sundays and we wouldn't be. However, if work was needed on Sunday, there could be a special permit issued for that.
Absolutely.
So I have no problem with making a motion that we adopt the ordinance omitting the holidays.
Okay. Let me make sure we can we act on that at this time, or are we going to have to wait a little bit?
What you would need to do, because it's an ordinance change, if council wishes to go with a substitute ordinance, we would need to put that on the next work session agenda and have a public hearing for it on the next work session agenda, and then vote on it at the next meeting.
But what that does is if you do that, we will fall back to our existing ordinance, which does restrict the hours of work. If someone wants to work extended hours beyond what's in our ordinance, they have to come before the council and get approval.
Well, then I withdraw my motion until the proper time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Since there is no motion and second to override, the veto will be sustained. Okay. And we will adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn special call meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion. Okay. Now we'll call the meeting to order. This is our regular council work session, April the 7th, 2016. And if you would, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Russ?
Dear Lord, during this springtime of renewal, help us reflect on all the good in our lives, our family, our friends, our community, our country, and our world. There is bad in this world, but if we concentrate on all the good, bad is harder to see. Please help us see and create good in everything we touch as you do, my Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We're pleased to welcome tonight some new police department employees, and we would ask Chief Mitchell if he would recognize these.
Mayor and Council, thank you for this time. The police department's been working very hard over the past more than a year now and beyond to really hire employees, officers that are going to be the best fit for our organization and best fit for the community. And when we look for those that are going to be a good fit, we look for those that have the mindset of service and a spirit of service and for an attitude for our community of service. And with that, we have 5 new employees here today that I wish ask them to step forward. Miss Antoinette Jackson, if you can step forward, please. Kios Mary De Jesus. Officer Taylor Lilly. Officer Jonathan Nelson. And Officer Ryan Lonis. Ms. Jackson comes to us from the Cherokee Sheriff's Office with experience in records, and she is now going to be one of the new faces in our records division. So when you come in the police department, you'll be met by Ms. Jackson's smile, and we welcome her. Officer DeJesus, Kios Mary DeJesus, comes to us from the Cobb County Police Department and is now in our field training program, which they've been in for several weeks. Officer Taylor Lilly comes to us. He just graduated from the Cherokee Gypstick Police Academy. He's in the field training program as well. We have Officer Jonathan Nelson comes to us from the Marine Corps. He's a combat veteran and just graduated from the Police Academy as well and is in our field training program. And last but not least, we have Ryan Lonis. He comes to us from the Department of Juvenile Justice. Years of experience there, and is now part of our team in the field training program. So welcome our new officers and employees.
Thank you very much. And welcome aboard. Item B, we have a proclamation that I will just only read a portion of it. Basically, this is Building Safety Month. And it says, whereas each year in observance of Building Safety Month, Americans are asked to consider projects to improve building safety and sustainability at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential service provided to all of us by local and state building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies in protecting lives and property. Hereby proclaim the month of May 2016 as Building Safety Month in the city of Canton, and I encourage our citizens to join with their communities in participation in Building Safety Month. The next item, public announcements. Ms. McGrew, do you have anything?
I have a couple. I was looking for the dates for the shows for the Board of Education art shows at the Arts Center. Joe Ellen might be able to help me out with those dates. The middle school show is coming up, and then the high school show. Our students in Cherokee County are extremely talented, and they have a wonderful art show at the Arts Center. And those dates can be found on the website of the Arts Center, CherokeeArts.org. Go to the calendar for events. Also, the Historical Society is having their annual Derby Day party, May 7th at 3:30. And as always, the Arts Center is having its Canton Festival of the Arts the third weekend in May, Saturday and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. The art festival is a juried art show, and there'll be food. Absolutely have to have funnel cakes. I think it's illegal to not have funnel cakes at a festival. And there'll be a children's area, a literary experience, and Serenity Gardens, which promotes healthy and clean living.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Announcement? Okay. Thank you. Item 5, consideration to approve the agenda. Before I entertain a motion on that, I understand we do need to remove item 9D, which is its discussion of request to list the police department's golf cart on the GovDeal website. We'll pull that off for this time, and they're working on a different approach at this point, so that will call for. Are there any other changes that need to be made to the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Okay, any other discussion? If not, those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All members voting for the motion. All right, we also have in your agenda package the minutes from a call meeting February the 18th, the council meeting March 3rd, the March 3rd public hearing, and the March 17th council meeting minutes. Are there changes or corrections to be made to any of those?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve those minutes?
Second.
And a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. Mr. Peppers, City Council retreat summary.
Just letting you know that the notes from the summary, the summary from the retreat is attached for your approval.
Okay. Item 7. I'm sorry.
Can I
Go
ask a
ahead.
question?
Yes, ma'am.
Are we going to have a public hearing about the retreat, some of the things that we brought up, or are we just going to put them on the agenda as they come up?
We'll have some presentation at a later date. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Grant.
And do those notes qualify as minutes? Do we need to approve those?
Yes, you should approve them.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion and a second to approve the retreat summary. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay. All members voting for the motion. Also in your agenda package, you have the financials for February. This is for informational purposes only. Does anyone have any comments or questions regarding that? Okay. Now, our 10-minute public input period. What did I do with that one? Oh, this? No, that's not it. What did I do with that one? I got it here somewhere. We only had one individual, I believe, William. Where is he? Oh, yeah, Lop. Yeah, sure. Come on up. Yeah, just pull that around to you if you don't mind. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is William Lopp. I'm running for the congressional seat in the 11th District against Barry Loudermilk. The Republican primary is May 24th, and I wanted to take this opportunity to meet you and introduce myself to you. Barry Loudermilk is a freshman congressman, and he went into office in January of 2015. The first thing he did, day one, is break his campaign promise and vote in support of John Boehner. In December, he voted in support of the omnibus spending bill, which further put our nation in debt by another $2 trillion. We're now $20 trillion in debt. I'm born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I started a CPA firm over 30 years ago and been in public accounting, serving the community in that capacity through small business and individuals. I'm passionate about several things. One would be taxes and regulations. I work every day with the federal government dealing with the taxes and regulations. This is really the position that I should be in because I work with that each and every day. Also, the education of our youth. We need to do better in that area. We're 25th in the world in science. We're 37th in math. We need to do better in education, but we need to concentrate on education at a local level. I'm also an advocate for pro-life. I'm a board member of the Pregnancy Aid Clinic. They had a facility in Hateville. We expanded the operation to a mobile clinic. We expanded the operation to an additional facility in Roswell. What we're doing is we're educating families, young families, on how to cope with having, expanding and having a family. I service my community in various respects. Through the accounting, small business and individuals for over 30 years. the Rotary. I was a member of Rotary for a number of years, a member of my church, and at the school, I coach my children's programs, be it soccer, is what season we're in now. My name is William Lopp. I'm running for the congressional seat against Barry Loudermilk. There's 5 candidates running for that position on May 24th. I believe my experience and background is the best of all the candidates, and I should be the choice, and I hope to have your support for the May 24th primary. My name is William Lopp. You can find me williamloppcpaforcongress.com on the website and Facebook, and I'm out there, and I wanted to take this opportunity to meet you all. I would appreciate your consideration, would appreciate your lookup. I'm the best candidate. I do what I say I'm going to do, and that's the reason why I've had some relative success in the accounting business for a number of years.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay. Next item. Under new business, discussion of the ordinance adopting the proposed Canton Historic District. Mr. Peppers.
Mr. Mayor and Council, as you know, last year the Mayor and Council asked to create a Historic Preservation Commission. That commission has been meeting. They have created some guidelines. They have proposed a district. They have held their own public hearing in accordance with state law. We held a public hearing tonight in accordance with state law. And what you have before you are going to be 2 items tonight that are back-to-back. The first, 9A, deals with an ordinance and the district that would be created as the Historic Preservation Commission district for the city. And then 9B is the guideline ordinance that lays out the process as it relates to that particular district. I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Does anyone have any questions about the district? Mr. Grant?
I don't have questions. I have comments. Is that okay?
Sure.
Now?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the citizens serving on the Historic Preservation Committee. I applaud and commend your services, and thank you for your time. Also want to thank the citizens who've taken time to consider this and speak either in support or against it. I want to talk about sort of so-called comments on acting hastily. I would argue otherwise. It's quite the opposite. I think Canton's far behind on this. All surrounding cities. Rome adopted their first historic preservation district in 1979. Since that time, they've adopted 4 additional ones because of the economic growth and positive contributions it made to the city. I also think we're also already seeing the benefits of having historic assets in our community. For instance, the school board properties. We have a developer, a contract with a developer who is intending to develop that, preserve the buildings, but also increase new economic growth with a mixed-use development. So I think we can see that growth, that preservation is good business. Also, just to call everyone's attention that this is nothing that Canton's created or our building department or our commission. It's a state statute. It's along the guidelines of the Georgia Historic Preservation Act, and we're all guided by that. And speaking of the process, though, I do believe we have the guidelines here. I think we need to review those thoroughly before we do vote on it the next meeting and make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. I do think that any way we can streamline this process and make it easier, more efficient, it's good for the city and it's good for our developers. 45 days, is a period of time to wait, but also keeping in mind that is just if the building department deems it's necessary to go before the Historic Preservation Commission. And as someone mentioned earlier, in the past year there hasn't been any applicants that would have even required that. However, I do, though, that I think there are good examples. Roswell, for instance, has what's called a minor certificate of appropriateness and a major certificate of appropriateness. A minor one is decided by the zoning director or the building community development director. Simple things as paint or sign and things like that. And that is on his or her discretion, and a decision is made in 10 days. I think we could consider something similar for minor cases that we don't have to add, additional regulations not necessary. And then their major one is the 45 days, which allows time for public, public hearings and advertisement of that. So I do agree with that. I think Mr. Johnson earlier who said that all cases would be considered, and economically, if it's good, I trust these people to make good decisions, and they have been to training, and they are equipped to go out for outside consultation when necessary. So I'm sure we will see improvements as we go along, but I think we're far behind this, and we need to have it. And I hope we just look at the process and continue to refine it and modify it and make it just better business for the city. So,
thank you. Ms. Wilson?
I have a couple of specific questions. I noticed in the ordinance it lists that a tree to be considered if it were to be removed is 50 years old. It's my understanding when this first came out that we were only talking about commercial businesses that were at least 50 years old. And I did not see that in the guidelines. It may be there and I missed it.
The 50-year-old rule is what we applied to the moratorium that the council put in place with regard to demolition. And it's not specific in this ordinance. Where it comes into play is if that property is eligible for historic tax credits from the state or federal government. It has to be 50 years old.
So we're not going to limit it to any building that's 50 years old?
No.
Or older?
No. It will be for commercial properties.
Right, only commercial.
Within the district.
Right.
Or residential properties that are converting to commercial properties.
Right. So to answer Mr. Cooper's question, he said, what are the benefits? The benefits for him in a residence would be that his residence would be enhanced by keeping the historic preservation of the city of Canton, the history, beautiful, and so I think his property would be enhanced. Another question I have, Amy asked about enforcement. The enforcement for this would be the commission?
The commission would have hearings, and the commission would make commission-based decisions. Those would be placed in letters. If there is, and Mr. Green can answer this maybe better than I can, if there is an issue with maintenance, that would fall to the code enforcement department. But everything else would be handled through letters, and then there would be an appeals process on any of that back to the council.
If there is a property maintenance issue, that would be handled by either code enforcement or the building official or the building department.
Okay. Okay. Another question I had is, I noticed that we had a question somewhere, not tonight, but somewhere else, that was a rather new building. And this person wanted to make some changes to his building that's less than 10 years old. Would that come before the commission?
Yes, it would.
So
if it is an external
it is. I think it's an
change
external.
to the property,
okay,
and it is a commercial property within the district, it would come before the Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay. Then the other question is, I think it would be nice for the audience to know how long the commission was in training and a little bit about the training that they went through. That would answer the judgment question that I think Amy had too, that, is it based on judgment or is it just arbitrary? Or I think if we knew the type training that the commission had to go through in order to be a part of this.
We contracted through two highly qualified individuals that are well-versed and well-respected throughout the state in historic preservation training. And we had, I believe, 6 meetings with these people that discussed anything from architecture to types of buildings that could be considered. And this went on for a period, I think, of 3 months at the end of 2015. So they have had a great deal of training, and there's always the opportunity to continue that. The state offers, I think, at least twice a year, other training options or opportunities for commissions like this, and we can certainly look into that as an ongoing effort.
Right. I think that's good to know that these people have been trained, and they are not just they're not just an ordinary citizen like me that just said, I don't like that. So
Yes, ma'am.
they have been trained. Okay. I think that's all the questions I had, Mayor.
Okay, Ms. McGrew?
Thank you. 9A talks about the district boundaries. I've got a few comments. Would you please reiterate again how these boundaries were determined?
These were looked at by the commission, by Mr. Patton and myself as areas that we felt were significant in the downtown area for buildings that deserve to be preserved or protected. We didn't want to go too far either way with our first attempt at this, kind of keep it where it is so we're not overwhelmed. And there's always a possibility to expand the district in size or even to include all structures within the district.
Thank you. Mr. Peppers, would you address, please, if a building is not viable, if it's historic yet unsafe, if the structure is not viable, would that building be allowed to be destroyed?
Sure. I mean, there is a process in the ordinance that lays out in 9B in the guidelines that talks specifically about the demolition of structures. And the commission can actually approve a certificate of appropriateness on the demolition. I mean, those things can be done. But what they have to look at is they have to look at, the type of structure it is. Are there any other examples of that type of structure in the district, or is it the last standing example of that structure? How important the historic significance is of that building? Is there a financial hardship that would be placed by trying to renovate that building as compared to demolition? Are there reasonable methods and measures that can be taken to save the building? Is it a safe building? I mean, all of those kind of fall into place before they make that decision. But yes, I mean, technically you can demolish a building within the historic district.
I ask to get this out in the public so that they know this. One other question is, I believe when you were giving your introduction, you said we came up with guidelines. Now, did you use the Georgia Historic Preservation Act guidelines for the Canton Historic Preservation Commission? Did our commission add to any of our own guidelines to what the state already has, or are we sticking strictly to the state's Preservation Act?
No, these are only the state guidelines that are in here. There's
so
no
we just did not come up
guidelines.
with anything willy-nilly.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes, the question that I had is, currently we have, if you have a business in your home, you can have one employee. I guess, is that considered a business, or is that considered still a residence? I've had that question 2 or 3 times.
If it is a home occupation in our table of uses as it relates to business licensing, then it would be considered a residential unit. If it is a multifamily residential dwelling, it could be seen as a commercial property. Is that correct?
Thank you.
Mr. Grant?
And one other question and point of clarification. I know we currently have the oversight committee that exists that reviews standards and paint colors like that. It's my understanding and my hope that within the Historic Preservation District, the oversight committee would be eliminated for those properties, and only the Historic Preservation Commission and the Oversight Committee, everything beyond that
That is
district, correct?
The Oversight Committee would still review design on everything that is not covered by the Historic Preservation Commission.
So we're not
There's no duplication there.
adding a different review board. Thank you.
Anyone else? One of the questions, of course, I think that Bill Staub had asked about was, if you wanted to build a house downtown or something like that, would you have to do it? But I think you can't stress enough that it only affects residential properties. And I would assume if there were
Commercial.
Commercial. It doesn't affect residential. And I assumed if there was a piece of vacant commercial property that you decided you wanted to put a home on, you could do that, and then it wouldn't be would not affect. I don't know if that was his question or not. And I think that Mr. Grant answered a couple of people's concerns. Roy Taylor had mentioned 2 committees, including the oversight, and the oversight would no longer be participating in the issues that the Historic Preservation Commission would be involved in, but would still be those outside the district. The Oversight Committee would still be involved in that. So, and of course, so they wouldn't be completely done away with, but it wouldn't be a overlapping there of the two entities. I do understand, Mr. Peppers, that the design guidelines are available and have been available on the website. Is that correct?
Yes, they are available. If you look at the front page of the city's website, about midway down on the left, there's a link that says Historic Preservation, and it has all of the documentation on that particular page, including PowerPoint presentations and the like. And it's been up for at least a 3-week period.
Okay. I agree with Mr. Grant certainly on the fact that if we could have some minor certificates that might make sense rather than all of them being equal, and with minor certificates of appropriateness being maybe a 10 business days or something like that, because some of the I can understand where a major development or something to review that might take a long time, might take a while, but some of the very minor changes and so forth shouldn't take long at all. And I would hope that the commission may well be available more on a as needed basis. In other words, when an issue comes up, they would be contacted and could actually convene a meeting within a very few days and make it as convenient as possible for those that need to move on with their work. And Ms. Patty Ball mentioned that anytime you do have judgment calls, you've got to be very cautious about not being arbitrary or capricious in that regard. You need a good foundation for why you want to require something. You got to have a reason. And I think you can't just be arbitrary. But we all have judgment, and government many times is a lot about judgment calls, and we've all gotten in trouble because of judgment calls. But it got to be done, and what you do if you make one and it doesn't turn out to be exactly what you want, you back up and make it right. And that's what we'll do, I think, with this ordinance, is that if we move forward and there are problems that we learn about as we go along, we'll correct them. I mean, that's what it needs to be. And I can tell you there will be issues that come up that we had not even thought about that this council will make corrections on. So anyway, Ms. McGrew.
Yes, please. I'd like to address some of the comments I heard from the citizens. Mr. Peppers, do you mind?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Taylor was concerned that we're not ready to pass an ordinance, that we hadn't looked at the entire process. And I was wondering if guidelines are indeed on the website, and they've been there for 3 weeks. Is the process also well-defined on the website?
Yes, there's actually a flow chart on one of the screens, on one of the links on that section
So
of the
we
website.
are ready?
Yes.
The process is well-defined, thank you. He mentioned the Must building, that it was not historically significant, but wasn't that built within the time frame of the historic preservation consideration, and also that filling station at Marietta and other Marietta?
As it relates to buildings that contribute to the historic district, there's not an age that's placed on those. It's more of a style, it's a structure. You know, the comment that was made was that building is made out of concrete block. You know, it's not as significant. I'd point the council back to Railroad Street. There are a number of those warehouse buildings down there that are made of concrete block, and you know, the Historic Preservation Commission could find that those are historically significant to the history of the community, as the mill was historically significant to the history. Likewise, if someone had a vacant property and they wanted to construct a new building, you know, those guidelines would still be in place to help author the design of that building to make sure that it is built in a compatible nature with the existing buildings in the area. So as it relates to picking one building over another building, the idea is that once the district is approved, the buildings within that district contribute to each other, and they have to be looked at individually, and they also have to be looked at in the context of all the buildings in that area.
Thank you. 2 more things. Ms. Ball mentioned judgment and being uniform. Are we prepared for that? Are our guidelines specific enough to maintain uniformity?
I think they are, but I think the thing that you have to remember, and it's the same way with a planning commission or any other body of the city, is that every circumstance that comes to you is going to be a little bit different.
Okay.
And if you apply the same principles of dedicated research, you apply the same principles of hearing out from the property owner, the developer, and then you apply the same level of judgment to each case, then I think you're not placing a different level of judgment on this case versus this one. What may be insignificant to you is significant to someone else, and part of the reason for the HPC is to create that public hearing process for that certificate of appropriateness, which allows others to come forward and say, this is why this building is significant to the community.
Thank you. And one last thing, I'd like to thank Mr. Staub for his recognizing that Mr. Crosby is doing a very good job. I appreciate his recognition of our staff member.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
I just had one other comment to make. Mayor, I sometimes tend to oversimplify things, and I want to be sure this is what I heard. Within the Historic Preservation District, the Oversight Committee will actually be the Historic Preservation Committee.
No.
So there will
be
an
no
oversight
committee in that district.
As well as the HPC.
There will be none. Okay, that committee will not.
That's what I meant.
Oh, okay.
The Historic Preservation Committee will act as the oversight committee.
That's correct.
Within that district.
Yes, ma'am.
So that will sort of do away with one level of bureaucracy.
In that district,
In that
it will.
district.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I heard that.
That is correct. Okay. Mr. Grant.
Also, I want to point out and clarify buildings such as Must Ministries or existing buildings in the district now, that ordinary maintenance or repair to sustain the current structure as is, no material change, does not require a COA, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we're not adding any additional, if someone wants to repaint their building the same color or repair it, decay, then there's no additional regulations required there. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Move right along. Item B, discussion of the ordinance to adopt the proposed Canton Historic District guidelines. I guess we already did that, hadn't we? We separated the two there between the district, and because we'll have to vote on them separately, I guess, on the 21st.
You will.
Okay. Let's go to item C. Discussion of the request to terminate Valak 457B plan.
Mr. Mayor and Council, the City of Canton has had in the past several varying retirement plans for employees. This one is a 457 plan that was set up with the VALIC group, and we've had a little bit of an issue with this particular plan. When the plan documents were written, it basically states that the only way for a member of the plan, someone who's contributed to the plan, to opt out of the plan and move their money over is to be terminated from employment with a city. So we have some individuals who are currently in the plan that have contributed to the plan in the past that are city employees, and we utilize a different plan now, but they're unable to move their dollars from one plan to the other plan without being terminated. And we don't wish to terminate an employee so they can move their money around. In speaking with VALIC, what they have offered to us is that we can terminate this plan agreement with them. That would allow any of those existing employees to decide whether or not they wanted to stay with VALIC in a different plan or whether they wanted to move their money over into an existing plan that we have. Ms. Waters is here. She may have a little bit more detail on it. I do not believe any of our existing employees are currently contributing to the VALIC plan, so there's no existing contributions. They would just like the ability to move their money into one of the other plans that we have ongoing.
Okay. Thank you. Item E, introduction of the new fire department patch. Chief Floyd.
There's Chief Floyd.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is with great pride that we finally get to introduce our new patch. Just a little bit of history on the fire department patch that I'm wearing right now. This patch was coming in the early 1990s. The fire department changed our patch to this one. The way we come up with this patch is we opened up a patch book and seen Canton, Ohio, and said, that looks good, we want it. And that's how we ended up with this patch. Well, in 2014, we decided it was time to get a patch that really speaks to the familyness of the fire department and ties us with the community. Well, when we first started, the firefighters got together, started creating designs. Some of the patches, in all honesty, I wouldn't put on a motorcycle group. They were absolutely horrendous. So it becomes such a challenge that I asked Mr. Grant if he would offer his assistance in doing this. And I think he said yes before he really realized what I was asking. So Mr. Grant and Grant Design actually spent the time, went through, picked out the colors, and helped us and guided us to a patch that is truly as original as the city of Canton itself. This patch will start going on the shirts. This is one of our new hires that actually started Wednesday. This is his new shirt. So we're putting the patches on the shirt starting this week, and we're going to transition all the fire department over to it. The fire department started in 1916, March of 1916 to be exact. So we just finished our 100-year anniversary, so we did tie that into our existing patch. So I would like to thank Mr. Grant and Grant Design. They've done an excellent job. They put up with a lot of stuff in the fire department and really worked hard to get us what we are very proud of. And thank you very much, Mr. Grant.
Is this iron-on, Chief?
It's a sew-on. Yes, sir, it's a sew-on.
Oh, okay. Felt like it had something on the back of it. Okay.
You can see the stitch mark in that sew-on. I think the back, Mr. Grant can probably testify. I think it's the steel to make sure the extrusion's not really through.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you. Discussion of smoke detector battery replacement program. Mr. Peppers, and Chief, maybe?
Chief will be here with me. He can help discuss. Last year, we had some comments from the community, and they were asking us to look at a replacement program for batteries and smoke detectors for seniors. At the time, we were working to fill some vacancies in the fire department and really just didn't have the manpower at that time to develop a program. And I know the mayor and I have had an occasion to meet with some individuals of the public on this, and I had promised that we would try to look at this spring. And so Chief Floyd has put together a template for a program, and we've included that for a draft for the council to look at. It's ultimately your decision as to whether or not you would like for us to utilize our resources to offer this program to the community. And Chief here can speak to the program, answering questions you might have.
I think it's a great thing to do. I really do. I have a couple of questions regarding the application I guess, application itself. Actually, it doesn't, I mean, I assumed that we were talking about individuals 62, 65 or over, or someone who is disabled, that we would perhaps do that. Well, this application asks all kind of questions there, many of which I'm not sure have any great value, but does your residence have a basement? I guess you'd probably find that out pretty quick when you got there, but say my residence is a 1-story, 2-story, 3-story. Square footage of the home, and how many people, age group 0 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 17, and over 18 live in that house, I guess. I guess that's my only question is, do we really need to know all that?
Well, part of the information we do need to know ahead of time. You know, we need to know exactly what size home we're looking at because, you know, depending on the size of the home and the number of existing detectors that they have, that's gonna determine how long we think we're gonna have to be out there changing batteries. So
wouldn't you get that when they call in to make an appointment? I mean, how many smoke detectors you got? I mean, wouldn't that be the question?
Well, it could be, but you could also have a resident who has a home and they only have one smoke detector in a home with 3 levels. And part of this is an educational process too, and saying, you know, you really need more detectors than just the one with the 3 levels. Plus, it also gives us an opportunity to track this information as a city so that we know, you know, that when we go in and we're doing a project like this, these are the types of areas we're doing them in. When they're sitting down on an annual basis and they're trying to figure out how much money to budget for the program, last year this is what we did, this is what we need to provide. It's just more basic information for the person going out, because the person who's answering the call is not likely going to be the person who's actually installing the battery. And so it's important to take down as much information as possible so the person who's actually going out and doing the installation has that knowledge when they get on site.
So how would you treat one house that had 1 3-year-old and one house that had 2 3-year-olds differently when you went out there?
Well, the fire department's also using this as an opportunity for community relations. And for instance, in the fire department,
maybe take some toys and candy out with them?
Well, for instance, in the fire department, they have a coloring book and they have pencils and things like that. If they know there's going to be children there at the home, they'll probably take some with them, you know, and use that as an opportunity to engage with the kids while they're on site. In addition, you know, if you've got someone who is aging and maybe they're hard of hearing, that may make a determination in what we actually tell them they might need if they don't have something out there. Is that a fair assessment, Chief?
Ms. Wilson, do you have something on that one?
I was just going to say that I really appreciate this, and I'm glad that the fire chief is on board with it, because I see it as a public relations tool for the city, because it's almost like coffee with a cop, but you're going into the homes of people who really need your assistance. Also, that it also helps you in the fire department as you go into a home to help people maybe if they have some fire hazards there, that you might educate them in that. So I wondered how you're going to staff the people who go into the homes. Will it be off-duty people that you'll pay with PR money, or how will you staff it?
Our intent, if this passes, we're going to start with the fire inspector department. If they're available, we're going to send those. If those are not available, then we're going to send probably our compliance officer, and if he's not available, then we're going to send a truck out. So we're going to do it with our own staff personnel.
Okay, so you're not going to send somebody who's on call that might get a call for a fire and they'll be out putting in a smoke detector?
We'll actually send a fire truck. If it comes to it, we'll actually send a fire truck up to it.
No, I mean, if you won't be sending someone who is on call in case you get a fire, you know, you'll be sending the compliance officer or someone else.
Yes, ma'am. We'll send the fire marshal's office first, then the compliance, and then if we've got an appointment, we can send, and we'll actually send a fire truck. We'll take the fire truck, but if they get a call on their way to that, they'll just abandon that detailing to run the call itself.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad you're thinking about this.
Mr. Goodwin, do you have something else?
Well, the only other thing I was going to mention, and Chief just brought this up, part of the reason, too, for this information is there are some particular grants out there that are available to the city to help get reimbursement or to get product for these, and having information like the number of children in a home, the age groups, and all that can be used towards those grants.
Should we ask income? That's a major factor in a lot of grants. I mean, I don't know that people want to really give you that stuff, but, you know. Mr. Goodman, go ahead.
I just mainly want to say thank you for the interest we've had in this program. I think we sometimes get involved with our own families a lot and don't look at some of our people that live in our area. Some of them are elderly and just can't get around and do this. And I think the fact that our public safety team could do such a thing would be great. I think it speaks volumes of our city. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Grant.
I also support the effort and applaud the fire department for offering this public service to our senior citizens. But also just having the measures in place to ensure that public safety comes first. And I heard you say, you answered one of my questions, that if a truck is on the way and you get a call, that comes first. One question about the application time period between application and installation or the checks. I'm assuming that ample time, so you're scheduling your resources accordingly, or?
Yes, sir. If we get a application in, first we got to make sure we have the resources to fill it. You know, if they're calling for smoke detectors and we're going to a couple of stories south and we know that we got to take 4 or 5 smoke detectors, we have to make sure they're there. Then for the batteries, it's just a turnaround. If we get the application, we'll probably schedule it for the next day. If we don't have anything planned, you know, the fire department call response comes first, then we got all the details that we have to do, and we'll work around it to try to get it within a day or so.
And again, if those resources are diverted by call, then that takes precedence. Maybe we should just indicate that on the application itself.
Well, and for instance, too, there's going to be certain times of the year where it's a little bit more difficult to schedule. You know, our fire departments and all of our elementary schools for fire safety during the month of the year. So we will be able to tell those residents up front, we're going to try to get you scheduled, but, you know, the time may vary depending on the time of the year.
And also just, as we were talking about the Historic Preservation District, that as we go along in this program and we're seeing what the demand is, I mean, it can be refined as necessary. I think something similar is when we, with the police department and, you know, driving people home that had too much to drink, and I think we established a trial period of that, or, you know, we're monitoring that, so I assume we'll be doing the same thing here to make sure our resources aren't stretched too thin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Rust?
I had about 3 pages written here on this, but I've listened to the discussion, so I've kind of changed my comment. My big concern is the Canton Fire Department administration of this, primarily because I wasn't aware you were going to go through a 3-step process, the last of which is on-duty firefighters taking a fire truck out. I thought that was your first choice. So if that's your third choice, then, and you can schedule these, you can hopefully have a very rare circumstance when a fire truck would be out on call fixing a battery when you get an emergency. Is that correct? What percentage would you say might be that latter, the third step?
I believe, right now with the construction going the way it is, and our existing inspector, the way he's doing existing buildings, we're probably going to be a 50-50, sending the truck out to 50% of the time and sending inspectors and compliance officers to the other 50. If we're lucky, we'll get a 50-50 split.
That just seems too high to me. I'm really concerned about, you know, you gave me this fact, and this one just sticks in my mind. FEMA has estimated that it costs $125 an hour for a fire truck to be deployed.
To run the trucks, yes, sir.
So, you know, presumably, depending on where the call is going to come from, where it's going to go to, and the return back to putting that fire truck back in the bay, you might take 2 hours. That's $250. It seems like an awful lot of expense for a little dollar battery. And I understand all the public relations and everything you're trying to do in terms of teaching people about fire safety, but there's some real serious concerns I have about this. Particularly, you can't send one person out. We have a serious litigious society that wants to sue you because you look at a woman wrong and you're a man, you come in the fire department, all of a sudden you got some woman charging you with something which is way off the wall, but you can't, We talked about this, Chief, and it's,
Yes, sir. We'll
there's going to be
actually send
two, there's going to be
people
two people on that truck. And that's two firefighters or two inspectors. You just can't send one out because of that. You got risks of damage to hardwood floors, carpeting. The ladders you currently use are made to dig into dirt and
Yes, sir.
ground.
Or dig into
You're
anything.
going
They'll
to
dig into
have to,
concrete.
you can't use those. You're going to use something different. So the truck is going to have to be re-equipped before it goes out with that, plus batteries and whatever. And is that going to inhibit that truck when it gets delayed or diverted to a fire en route? Or worse yet, in my opinion, some firefighters on a ladder, he's on duty, and there's a call comes, he's got to go down the ladder, deploy. If he's there in a fire truck, that's one thing. If he's there in another vehicle, that's even worse in a way, because he's got to go back to the station, get on the truck, get out. You got somebody that could have a house burned down, die, whatever, get hurt. I am just very concerned. One of the solutions that I would recommend is that the city certainly advocates and promotes this in any way we can, but if we have 50%, let's just take that 50% that's not firefighters and do everything we can. And then if somebody has an emergency, we recommend a list of people that want to do this as a business. When Andy first brought this up, I asked Andy a very straightforward question. Andy, what do you do when your battery goes out? He says, I call a handyman for $35. To me, that sounds reasonable. It was reasonable to me. I think it would be reasonable to the city, the residents of Canton. We have a big concern for the same senior group that is 65 and over about ambulances. When you call an ambulance, you get charged. There's a charge. It's not free. For a $250 call for a $1 battery, it seems to me that there's a better way and a more efficient way to do that. I think it will also promote a lot of people using the service that don't need it. For instance, if you're going to have to ask these questions before that truck's deployed, because you don't want to go out there and say, wow, we need somebody to sign here who owns a house, and a 14-year-old daughter says, oh, my dad said to have you go ahead and do it. Well, you can't do it. You got to walk away because the guy who owns, man who owns a house has to be there. So what do you do when you get out there and you've got the expense already and you can't do your job? Because there's nobody there to sign the agreement. Or if somebody has knowingly or unknowingly falsified the information about handicap. Or what happens if a 65-year-old's got a 35-year-old wife? I'm not going to say anything about that, but should you look to that second person to get up on the ladder and fix it rather than sending us out for $250? I mean, fair is fair, and I would like to push towards that education process for as many people as we can. When it comes to deploying a firefighter, no. I have a deep, deep concern about damage to property and potential liability for the city. Not only deployment of a fire truck there, can you imagine somebody that has a house burned down, somebody dies or something in a fire? Why? Because there was somebody putting in that $1 battery up in Soleil, and somebody gets a problem because and our ISO rating could go up because we're going to be slower. You are not going to be faster. It's not going to improve the efficiency of this whole process. It's a very, very unusual thing happened to me today. I just finished typing all this up. We're putting all this in my computer. I was about to hit print. My wife knocks on my door and she says, somebody wants to talk to you. So you go out there, and he's got a firefighter shirt on. He's moonlighting, doing home repair, whatever. I asked him, I told him what I was doing. I said, what do you think? He said, you got a terrible idea. He said, he agreed with what I said, that I don't want firefighters deployed. He said, you in Canton, Georgia are understaffed, and this will only make it worse. He was a firefighter in Atlanta, in Cherokee County, and he's a firefighter right now in another city, and I'm not going to say the name of it. It's not that close to us, but he's a firefighter. He knows the business. And when I told him we were going to deploy firefighters to repair, he said, that's a really terrible idea. And it's a really terrible idea for Canton. We have fought for years to get staffed up. We're going to staff down for a $1 battery? Think of another way, a better way, cheaper way, better for everybody. Anybody that asks for a $1 replacement for a $250 cost, you're wasting city assets, money. I don't want to see that happen. I want us to support it every way we can. But let's figure out a way to do it without firefighters that are supposed to be ready to fight a fire, not going up on that ladder for a $1 battery. Thank you.
Mr. Grew?
Thank you. Mr. Peppers, could you tell me other cities that you know of that have this program?
The city of Woodstock will do it, but they don't advertise their program. It's on an on-call basis. Cherokee County has a similar program. It is run through Aging Services, Senior Services, so people contact Senior Services. Senior Services turns around and contacts the fire department for the county, and it's actually the fire inspectors that go and do it, not actually the fire trucks.
I'm sure you've done your homework. Do these other cities that do this, have they come across any problems?
The city of Roswell, I spoke with the administrator out there, and she mentioned one occasion where they had a fire truck that was sent to a home, and they attempted to park the fire truck on the driveway and cause damage to the driveway at the home, and the city had to pay to have the driveway redone.
Can you tell me what type of budget you expect for this process?
We actually do this program now. We just don't advertise.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. We actually do this now. We just don't advertise it. Right now, we're getting the smoke detectors from the state. So we're not having to incur a cost for that. That resource has dried up. So the ones that we've got, I think we have about 7 or 8 left. Once those are gone, that resource has dried up. We've not had to take batteries to anybody yet. Typically, when we come out, we get an alarm ringing. We'll show up, and they say my battery's beeping. We'll plop one in and leave. We've not had to pay for it. Half a year, I don't know.
Did I hear you correctly that you say we already do this?
Yes, ma'am. I've actually been to Mr. Bonner's house and changed it myself.
Are we going to advertise this process, or are we just going to do it as needed?
We have an official program. We'll advertise it, and I think you'll
And
find...
I have a question. It's a little bit of a snarky question. I apologize in advance for it. But if we're already doing it, why are we discussing it?
Because right now what we're doing is we're doing a program on an as-needed basis as just a nicety to the community. We were asked to develop a full-fledged program and advertise that program, and that's what we've brought to you, is a full-fledged program that can be advertised.
Thank you.
Mr. Grant?
Just one quick question as far as the risk. I think very small of liability. I mean, could we have a simple waiver of liability if someone wants this service?
We have one in there.
Okay.
But as with everything, you can have somebody sign a hold harmless, and you do something, they're still going to sue you.
But the intent's there, so
right. Thank you. The intent is there.
Ms. Wilson?
I understand that. You can always, if you sign a waiver, that doesn't exclude you from suing, but I think that could be added to the application, that if any property was harmed, that the city would not be liable, maybe some wording to that. But the one thing I wanted to make clear was that the application is not signed when you go out. The application has to be sent to the city. Am I correct? The application has to be submitted to the city. You have to review it, and then you call and make an appointment to go. And it has to be a signed application, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Getting to the mayor's question, when we start looking at, we get the signed application in, we're looking at how many floors, the basement, and all that. Because each level of the house has to have a smoke detector. So that starts guiding us to how many we have to take. So when we start looking at a 2-story with a basement, we know we got to carry at least 3. The square footage a smoke detector is going to cover, depends on the brand, 800 to 1,200 square foot per smoke detector, so we can start getting ready. If we've got the resources, we'll grab them and go. If not, we'll have to get the resources, and we're trying to work a deal with some retail companies to start getting some donated if this passes. So that's where this comes in. Once the application's finished, we get everything is verified, we can call the water department. Are these residents 65, do they own this property? It's just a real quick phone call, then we'll schedule it and go out.
Right. And I believe that you mentioned there are grants for this kind of
We've had grants in the past. The State Fire Marshal's Office has actually donated smoke detectors
before.
And
we're going to apply for some of those grants?
If they're available.
If they're available.
Most of those most grants that were available at one time are not available now. They've dried up. But by having the information, if the grant does become available, we can show a track record.
Right. And I just wanted to say, too, that I like the idea of having a program in place rather than an ad hoc program, because if you have a program in place, you're going to reach a lot more people, and one fire that kills one person is really worth a lot. So I think this prevention of one fire even would be worth it. Thank you.
I hate to belabor this point any longer, but one other thing is you would not take an application on the phone. In other words, I can't call. I'm 78 years old, and I need you to replace my batteries. Or you got to mail me something. That's going to take 4 or 5 days. In the meantime, my house burns down.
I think if an individual called us and they did not have the ability to get us an application, say they were disabled and they were bedridden or what have you and could not get an application to us, we would make every effort to take care of it, go out there, just as long as we can get the information of where they live and what type of house they're in.
So what would be the normal process? Would they call and ask somebody to mail them an application, or would they come to City Hall and get an application? What do you anticipate?
There's a couple of different ways we could deploy the program. That's more of an administrative thing we'll have to discuss, but I imagine that we'll have it available on our website. I imagine we could have a form available that we put when individuals file for senior exemption. We could have that form available downstairs. We could try to make the form available to some of our neighborhood HOAs to have, and we'll just have to look and see how many we have of what categories in the city. I mean, I could see at some point in the future maybe we include it in with a water bill or something like that. We'll just have to look at a deployment.
Okay. Anyone else? All right.
And I should mention, too, that, when our police department's doing community policing efforts, they can have the form, too. We can have it with our meter readers. We'll put it in other parts of the city so that if they're out among the people, they can deliver it as well.
Okay. Thank you. Discussion of the fee waiver request from North Georgia Angel House.
Yes, North Georgia Angel House is located on 100 Hospital Road. They are a nonprofit organization. They have their program is related to foster care, and they have requested for us to waive their permit fee. They've already paid it, so if the city decided to waive it, we would do a reimbursement. It's the first one that's come up since I've been here, but I think the best process is to bring these to the council and let you decide if you want to waive a fee, and then we'll administratively do it.
All right. I have a question. You have a question? Mr. Rust?
Billy, is this going to be right in the hospital?
Pardon?
Is this going to be in the hospital, or where is it?
No, it's just on the road. It's the first property on the left as you're going up Hospital Road off of 140.
Oh, okay.
On the
It's not connected to the hospital at all, really?
No.
No.
Not at all.
Because we just were in a tour of the hospital today, and they showed us where the gift shop was, and I wondered if this is where.
No, this is not for Northside Hospital.
Thank you.
Next item, discussion of the Canton-Cherokee County Growth Boundary Agreement. Mr. Peppers?
I wanted to bring this to the council's attention. We have a growth boundary agreement that was drawn up with Cherokee County, and it was drawn up in 2004. Part of the reason why I wanted to bring this to your attention, in the last few weeks, we have received some discussion from developers who are interested in the possibility of annexing property into the city of Canton. And I asked staff to show me what we had as a growth boundary agreement. And basically, the agreement that we have sets forth a guideline that when someone wants to annex into the city, we provide information to the county, letting them know about the annexation, the property, the zoning that it would come in, the process dates, and all of that. And that's currently what we've followed. Our most recent annexation, which was for residential property on Haynes Road, that was the process that we followed. I will tell you that I do have a little bit of a concern because from the county standpoint, the last annexation that they heard on Key Drive, which is in our growth boundary agreement, we did not hear anything from. And so that's a situation where maybe we're adhering to the agreement and they may not have adhered to the agreement. I do know that the other cities in Cherokee County do not currently have active growth boundary agreements with the county. Our particular agreement spells out that the only way to cancel the agreement is for both parties to mutually agree to do that. And we haven't been able to find anywhere in the record since 2004 where the city of Canton has said we don't want to be part of a growth boundary agreement. So having said that, I wanted to bring that to your attention. I will be happy to make a phone call to Mr. Cooper and discuss it with him, but I think it's important for the city to understand that we're going above and beyond with a full faith effort to let the county know when we've got something in those areas. And if the agreement is in place between the city and the county, we hope the county will follow the same process.
Mr. Grant.
Yeah, I was going to just suggest that we do that because, for instance, the Key Drive annexation, I mean, first I saw about that was in the newspaper, especially if it's in our service, delivery area that we may potentially have to be, determining how we're going to do that. So I think it should be mutual and respected. So
I agree. I would hope that you would contact the county and at least open a dialogue with them about this, because, and part of the problems that I've encountered, or at least had some people concerned about, is that around Canton Marketplace, of course, on one side of the Highway 20, the south side, that's the city of Canton. On the north side is Cherokee County. And there are some differences in our sign ordinances and so forth, and different other regulations and codes. And it would make sense had we been notified about what all was going on and given an opportunity to have input to the county then regarding that development that's going on there, then maybe we could have at least asked that some of the guidelines, that they follow some of the city guidelines such that it would sort of match up the south side of Highway 20 that's already in place there. So I think there's certainly a benefit to both entities there.
Well, specifically in the agreement, it says if a development project located in the growth boundary is submitted to the Board of Commissioners for consideration, the Board of Commissioners desires to obtain the city's cooperation regarding input regarding the project within the growth boundary by either annexation to the city prior to development or a memorandum of understanding that the development project will meet quality design standards and design uses.
Exactly.
I mean, right now we have a situation on the north side of Highway 20 where we've got new retail that's come in. A lot of people think it's in the city of Canton. It's not in the city of Canton. The south side of Highway 20, Canton Marketplace is, and there are two very different sign ordinances that are in place. And we have commercial property owners that are in the city that are questioning why the business across the street can have a sign that's 3 or 4 times the size of their sign, and we have to say they're not in the city, they're in the county.
Yeah. Not only that, we have to. There's so many areas that the city and the county share utilities, and I think that's one of the reasons we need to know where annexations are coming in, because we may be the ones that are providing the utilities, the water, the sewer. So it's very important, I think.
Part of the basis for that growth boundary agreement was an understanding as it related to utility service area, that if the growth were to take place in that growth boundary agreement and we have the capacity to serve that area with water and sewer, that we would do so. And right now what happens to the city is we'll have an individual who would like to do something on a piece of property that really isn't our growth boundary agreement, but they really don't want to have anything to do with the city as it relates to ordinances on design or anything like that. They just want our water and sewer. And that's when we hear from them, is after they're going through the process and they need water and sewer.
Anyone else have anything on that issue? If not, we'll move on. Discussion of the Planning Commission recommendation on case MP 1601-001, Riverstone MP, the Grand Reserve located on Reservoir Drive. Mr. Peppers.
And Mr. Green is here. He can help with this. In brief, the Planning Commission held a public hearing on March 21st and recommended approval of the application that was submitted in case number MP 1601001, the Grand Reserve at Canton, LLC, and their request to amend certain conditions in Pod H of the Master Plan MP 0606001. A little bit about the project. Grand Reserve at Canton submitted their application, and in short, this pod is the development of 45.34 acres that is to the north of, to the north and west of Reservoir Drive and Reinhardt College Parkway. As it was originally laid out in the master plan, the way the site was to be developed, there would be commercial and mixed-use development to the front of the property. There would be commercial mixed use to the front, apartments in the middle of the property, and then as you go back on Reservoir Drive, getting closer to Amos Road, you would have single-family residential. The developer had asked the Planning Commission for a variance which would have allowed them to swap the uses of the multifamily and the single-family, which would put the single-family in the middle of the property closer to the commercial, and would put the apartments closer to Amos Road and further back on Reservoir Drive.
The developer's representative is here if anyone here has any particular questions regarding that. Anyone have any questions that they would need to answer? Ms. McGrew?
Yes, thank you. I'm curious exactly how many feet from Reinhardt College Parkway, the property starts there. How many feet does the property continue? Where does that property line stop? I know it stops just past Teasley, but I'm very curious as to how many feet that property is long.
I believe Mr. Chambers is representing the applicant.
I can take that in like 3/8 of a mile too, not necessarily just feet. And it can be a ballpark.
Thank you, Ms. McGrew. If I can read it.
Sure.
Because the type is very small. It appears to be all the way from Reinhardt College Parkway to the rear line of the entire parcel or pod.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, 267 feet, 336 feet, and another 574 feet, I believe.
So it'd be about 1,000 feet or so?
You read those numbers too fast for me to add.
Ms.
Can you read them again, please?
Visually, I think you can see where the school property is and the tree line is. Straight across from there is where the rear line is.
Okay. Will you read those numbers again for me, please?
I'm sorry?
The feet, the numbers you read, would you read
Yes,
those
ma'am.
again for me, please?
And this is along the westernmost line?
West
because
line.
You've got a curve in the road.
Okay.
It appears to be 267 feet, 336 feet, and either 874 or 574.
Thank you so much.
It's just so small, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I've got reading glasses if you want them.
Yeah, I got bifocals too. Mr. Peppers believes it's an 8.
So that's not along Reservoir Parkway though, right? It's on.
It is on Reservoir.
It's frontage. Those measurements are the frontage of
They're
Reservoir.
from Riverstone Parkway to the northwestern corner of this property along the western line.
Okay.
Yeah, not along the reservoir boundary, drive boundary. It curves, so it's not a.
Yeah, sure.
Has a longer distance.
Mr. Grant?
Yes. It appears that this request was made because the terrain in the center of the property would require more retaining walls, and it's easier to build it on the apartments on the back on a slab. But the master plan was approved, the opposite with the apartments in the center. Was that not considered? Was terrain not considered in the original master plan in 2007?
I can only tell you the reason for this application, and that is that center portion, as you know, is below grade on the road, and topography is considerably more difficult. The rear section or the northern section is a flatter piece of property. When you try to come in and put in apartment building, which has approximately 13,000, 14,000 square foot of space or footprint, much more difficult to put that on topo that's not flat already. Therefore, it would require much more in terms of dirt movement, much more retaining wall emplacement, as opposed to a single-family home, which is going to have around a 1,200 square foot footprint, and also have only roadways and driveways that can contour to the topography. You add the apartment building footprint with the required parking and parking area, much more difficult to get it on. Just practically not a very good idea for the movement of the topo around that center section.
I understand. Let me restate my question then. Has the topography changed since the master plan was presented in 2007?
I do not know the answer to that. I don't know. I know that the retention facility that's in place now, I'm pretty sure has changed since the original master plan. But since this particular portion of it has already had a revision since the original master plan. The original master plan included all of Riverstone, from Riverstone Parkway all the way up Reinhardt College Parkway, Reservoir Drive area, and even up to the Bluffs area.
The latest revision that you're referring to there, that was just a few short years ago, right?
Wasn't long ago.
Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe?
Yes, sir. I was not involved, so I don't know what the date was. Mr. Green may have that.
I wonder if Mr. Green could, the terrain, the topography where the apartments were originally intended in the center of the tract, has that topography changed since 2007?
Since I've been here with Canton, that property was already graded and was cleared, and to my knowledge, it has not been changed since that time.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? I see Ms. McGrew.
Thank you. It's normal to approve a master plan for commercial to be at one end, then apartments, and step down to single-family homes. And I understand you're asking for a change in this because of the topography, easier to build the apartments on a different soil. I'm curious as to what staff has recommended, because the board recommended for council to approve. Did council, was the board advised by staff, and what was the staff's findings? And does staff support moving and flipping the apartments and the single-family homes? Because this is not the usual way that people would want to live.
Typically, in our planning process, staff provides the facts, but they do not provide a recommendation. That is a little bit different than what I'm used to in other cities. And in this particular case, in speaking with staff, the concern that we have is that traditional zoning is to put the highest use at the busiest point of the development and to have the lowest impact use at the back end to phase everything down. There is some concern that if we make this switch here, that'll put that a little bit in balance. We can work around it, but I do think that the original master plan's intent was highest to lowest use as you go back in on the reservoir. Part of the reason I think for that is the fact that you already have apartments that are on Reinhardt College Parkway, and if you're going to have some commercial along Reinhardt College Parkway, then that next use makes sense to be apartments because it keeps them closer to the other apartment units, and it also puts the single family closer to the other neighboring properties which are zoned for single family.
Is there a chance that we could get stuck with no development at all if this is approved? If this is approved and the apartments are built on the end, the middle is saved for the single-family homes, what are the statistical chances of being stuck with that being vacant?
I don't know that I could give you any statistical chances, but there is always a likelihood when you make a change. And in this particular master plan, you're probably going to be dealing with three different developers: a commercial developer, a single-family developer, and an apartment developer. You may be making this change based on the desire of the apartment developer, and a few years down the road or a couple months down the road, the person who owns the property might find somebody who's willing to do single family, and they may not be happy with the change. But the change would have been met based on this request from the developer, first in, first to request, basically.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Ms. Wilson?
I'm ready. Okay, I want to simplify again for my own sake. You said that the staff did not recommend the change, right?
Staff did not make a decision. They did not provide a decision to the Planning Commission.
But if we were to ask the staff, Steve, did you recommend this change to the Planning Commission?
No, ma'am. As Mr. Pepper stated, our current UDC does not provide the staff to make a recommendation on any case. We just provide a technical report. So,
even if I ask you, you wouldn't make a recommendation?
oh, no. If you ask me, I would give you my professional opinion.
I'm asking.
Well, as Mr. Pepper said, in traditional planning, you start with the most intense use and work your way down. This would be opposite of that by having your apartment use and then your single family homes and then your apartment use. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
But bear in mind, though, that currently the middle section for single family is actually at 7 units per acre. So it's a very high dense single family.
Anyone else? Okay, that will be moved on to our 21st meeting. Discussion of a resolution to allow Georgia Power LED lighting for downtown.
Mr. Mayor and Council, and I should mention that this is not just downtown. I think that is a little misleading on the agenda. This would be citywide. Georgia Power has a plan over the next 5 years to phase out all of their existing lighting fixtures into LED lighting for more efficiency for their grid. And so what they have done is they have basically put the city on notice as we're one of their customers to let us know that they're going to start phasing in these LED lights. And what you'll see, they provide us a great question and answer. We actually asked them to quantify for us what this would mean as a city. And as you see on the chart, it's very small, but as you see on the chart, right now under our current lighting situations, we spend about $303,000 on street lights throughout the city, on power. As all of those are converted over to LEDs, we're going to save about $4,000 a month. We're going to see a little bit of a savings. It's not significant compared to the full amount that we pay for lighting our streets, but it will provide us with a better product. Georgia Power in particular is excited about the product. Right now, say if we had a special event going on in a certain area and we needed to be able to turn a light off, we would have to contact Georgia Power. Georgia Power would have to send someone out there. They would have to physically do it on the site. These new lights are set up so that they can be controlled remotely. They can be dimmed remotely. There's information for Georgia Power when one of the lights goes out. Instead of us having to make a contact, they're automatically notified. So there's some technical abilities with them that they're very excited about. Basically, what they're letting us know is that they're going to be discontinuing and disconnecting our old lights and replacing them with new light fixtures over the next 5 years.
Mr. Goodwin?
Do we have an alternative? I mean, if we decided we wanted to use another type light, can we do that? Or is this a Georgia Power? We own it, we're doing it?
Right now, these lights only relate to the lights that Georgia Power owns and we lease. So if you look at some of our major roads, we did not put up the poles. We're utilizing a Georgia Power pole in their light fixture. We do have the ability on lights that we own, which in some of our parks, for instance, we put up our own light fixtures.
Yes.
So we would have control over those, but we really don't have a whole lot of control over these because Georgia Power owns them.
Right. Well, I know they've been pushing LEDs for quite some time. And, you know, the fact that we didn't want LEDs in our city really doesn't make me real happy, just to be honest with you. I know they're very bright, but they don't last a long time. There's not much savings there. I sold lighting for a number of years, but I know that we have actually tried some lighting from one of our people that actually attends these meetings, and it seems that his product really does offer a lot of savings. So I think if we are considering something other than this, we should look to talk to other means, because those last a long time, and there's quite a bit of savings. In fact, that one interchange out there on exit 19 would be a tremendous amount of savings. But you know, if we get into something other than Georgia Power changing their own lights, I think you should, you know, talk to someone like that about that type of lighting. It really does save the city a lot of money.
If council wished, we could always put out an RFP or an RFQ and allow companies to bid on our particular lights. If y'all wanted to mirror what Georgia Power's doing and tell us that over the next 5 years you want to change things out, we could look at that. But one of the issues that we have in particular with our lighting, especially in downtown, the ornate fixtures that we have requires that we place those poles a lot closer together than, say, a Cobra light that Georgia Power has. And so if we change out, we would be looking at some significant costs based on the numbers that we have as compared to some of the fixtures that they're doing.
Well, there are 5 poles down from Bank of North Georgia that currently have other lighting on them. They've been up for close to 7 years, I guess. Still seeing, and they can be tinted to any color. But when Mr. Green presented that to, back then, whoever city manager was, there was quite a considerable amount of savings there. And I think we should actually look at that, because there is quite a bit of savings, but there is no upkeep to those products. They last 80 to 100,000 hours, where typical lighting lasts 25 to 40,000 hours. And I'd just like to see us look at different ideas. If Georgia Power is going to do this, regardless, it's their fixture, and that's one thing. But if in our parks and in what we control, our street lights, I think we should look at all different aspects of that. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. McGrew?
Thank you. Mr. Goodwin stated that the lights don't last very long, the LED. On the attachment that we were provided, on the back side, the second question, what are the benefits of LED lighting? One of the benefits listed is long life expectancy of fixtures. Is that the bulb itself?
Pardon?
What are the benefits of the LED lighting? What are the benefits? One of the bullet points of a benefit is long life expectancy of fixtures. Is that the light itself, or is that the light pole? What is a fixture?
It'd be the actual light
So
itself.
this paper that we were given says that the LED lights do last a long time.
And you know, Georgia Power is already contracted with somebody for their fixtures. They could be using a different technology. I do know that, you know, we had some discussions with and were provided some information from the particular individual that Mr. Goodwin was talking about. I asked our own electrical engineer at the city, could we utilize those particular lights at the interchange? There were some concerns. Those fixtures at the interchange are very high, and LED lights don't typically put off as much heat. And at that height, You know, if you've got something that's not putting off a lot of heat, you can ice over and actually crack lights. So there are certain areas where there are good applications of LEDs and certain areas where they're not. But in this particular instance, all we're doing from Georgia Power is leasing the light from them as part of a meter read. And so we really don't have a whole lot of control as to what they do, but they do want us to sign on to let them know that we understand that they are going to be replacing lights.
Ms. Wilson?
Do we have something that says we have no LED lights in the city?
What we have relates to LED signage.
Okay. So it's not pertaining to street lights?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. Anyone else have any questions on that? Okay. Next item. Resolution to endorse Downtown Development Revolving Loan Fund application.
The state of Georgia, at the Department of Community Affairs, an agency I'm very familiar with, has a program called the Downtown Development Revolving Loan Fund, which is basically a funding, a low-interest loan program that's available for communities to utilize for projects in their downtown. Particular projects, private sector projects, a business can apply for a program. They go through credit analysis and they're reviewed. The state of Georgia makes them go through an application process, decide if the projects, you know, can pay back the loan. A loan is provided as a second source financing from the state to the project to follow traditional bank financing. The only caveat with the program is the state of Georgia can't physically give money to the private sector. And so the way the program is set up, the state of Georgia provides a loan in the name of the local community or Downtown Development Authority, which is immediately used to buy down permanent financing from a lender. Just because it has our name on it, it's a non-recourse loan to the Downtown Development Authority. So they're not liable for any of it. All of it falls to the actual project. Our Downtown Development Authority, our city, Matthew Thomas put the project forward to the state. The state of Georgia went through the process, reviewed the project, approved a loan amount on the project. One of the conditions that follows that is once that loan has been pre-approved, the Downtown Development Authority that's going to be the vehicle for that loan has to approve a resolution supporting the project, and then the City Council has to approve a resolution allowing the Downtown Development Authority to be a vehicle on the project. So that's what you have before you.
Can you give some details about the project?
I can't, but I believe Mr.
I mean, we've heard of it. We know there's a loan out there. I mean,
Mr. Thomas, they might provide a little bit more. Ms. Roach is here. That's fine. DDA, she can provide a little more.
So the project's going to be used for a restaurant in the 151 building, which is owned by High Ridge Partners and Stan Rogers. The concept of the restaurant is still in a defining stage, so I'd rather not specify that. Give me a week or two so I can get all that stuff wrapped up. But we're doing business with Bank of North Georgia. We've been approved on that end. We've been approved through the DCA, and we've got a tentative lease signed with High Ridge Partners. So council is the last stage in the process. But give you kind of an idea, 120-seat restaurant, full service, beer, wine, and liquor. We'll start dinner service and then analyze lunch service as time moves along. Looking to employ anywhere between approximately 20 to 30 people to bring jobs down.
Assuming everything goes through for you there on this loan, what kind of time frame do you anticipate, say, being able to open up the restaurant? Got any idea?
I should be able to get done in about approximately 6 months. So definitely this year.
Okay.
Definitely this year.
Okay. Jack, did you have a question for them or
My
a
question
comment?
is more for Mr. Peppers. Have you been involved in one of these loans before?
I did one when I was with the city of Woodstock.
Okay.
There have been, gosh, when I was with the Department of Community Affairs, I think we, as a state, had done 100 100 or so of these loans since 2002, during that time frame of 100 loans, I think the state's only had to call the note on 2. What's really beneficial here in the city of Canton, particularly this loan fund, if the loan is done from the state of Georgia to any downtown in the state, it's typically a 3% interest loan. But if your community has a Main Street program, it becomes a 2% interest loan. So it's really good gap financing on a project. This will be the first one that we've used in the city of Canton. The city of Rome, for instance, the city of Valdosta, they've done upward of a dozen of these projects over time. It really is a great tool for the city to have in its toolbox. I know there have been a couple of applications in the past of projects in the city of Canton to the loan fund, but those projects never came to a closure.
Is there I guess there is a limit, certain amount that's...
There is. So the state of Georgia has a $250,000 limit on their loans, or up to 40% of a project total value. There's also a sister loan program that the Georgia Municipal Association has in their foundation, which is the Georgia Cities Foundation, which can also do $250,000. Those two can be combined on larger projects. I believe the project I did in Woodstock was about a $400,000 loan.
My final question would be, because I've had some people contact me about startup operations. They've been in that business before, but they want to come here and start up. Is that something that they look at favorably or no?
They have done some startups. They have done second businesses. It all depends on the actual credit worthiness of the person applying.
Okay, thank you.
Because they are personally guaranteeing those funds. The information on the loan fund, Matthew has it. It's on our website. It's available. We've spoken about it to other projects that have come into the city, into the downtown area, and hopefully we'll be able to get this one done and give us a good show product. I hope you don't mind being a guinea pig, but having a guinea pig that we can show off and maybe encourage others to utilize the fund as well.
I think I understand. I know the answer to this, but and I think so that there's no misunderstanding on it. The reason that the city has to sign, even though the DDA has already approved this, and yet there is no liability on behalf of the city for any repayment of this loan. I assume that the city only signs off because they want to support the project and show that it's something that we need downtown and would like to have.
Exactly. You could have a situation where you've got a downtown development authority that's very excited about having a particular project in town, and they go out and get the loan, and then it comes back and the city says that's not an eligible use for a building in the town, and then we have to go through the process. But in this case, we allow restaurants in town, and so we're just basically saying to the state, yes, we understand the project, and we appreciate and support the DDA in going after this and helping out the small business.
Ms. McGrew?
Yes, the DDA is applying for the loan, is that correct?
The actual loan application has a signature from the private entity, a signature from the Downtown Development Authority. I signed the original application on behalf of the city with the understanding that we got to do a resolution from the council at the end.
And Mr. Kell said that not all the details were hammered out about the name or the kind of restaurant. If that changes, will it affect the application? Or will you have those things decided before the application is submitted?
All of that has to be finalized before the final documents are drawn up with the state.
Okay, and the state loans the money to the DDA. The DDA disperses it.
The state loans the money to the project. The DDA never physically touches the money. They're just used as the vehicle to move the money over.
Who touches the money?
The bank.
The bank.
So basically, in this case, the project would secure construction financing, go out and get everything done, and after the project is ready to go, the construction financing is done, the state would come in and buy down that construction loan into permanent financing for their piece, and then Mr. Kell would have a loan over here with a bank and a loan over here with a state, and the state would take a second position behind the bank.
Does the state guarantee the loan that the bank makes?
Pardon?
Does the state guarantee the loan that a bank makes?
In this case, no, but the state of Georgia does have a state small business credit initiative program where they have done that before. It just depends on the credit worthiness of the project and the particular area of the state, the type of project. There's other tools that they can lump together. In this instance, it is solely a gap financing loan.
Okay, anyone else? Hurry and get it done. This will be voted on at our next meeting.
Correct.
And hopefully finalized at that point.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Discussion of the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant.
Yes. So we're going to go from restaurant to the sewer plant. Mr. Hatabian is here to help a little bit with this. I've provided a document up there for you. As I let you all know at the retreat and maybe even before then, we have been given the ability by the state of Georgia to increase our discharge limit at the wastewater plant from 4 million gallons a day to 8 million gallons a day, which is key to the city because if we want to continue to grow as a city, we need to continue to treat our wastewater, and we need to continue to have a method to move that wastewater out of our facilities. Part of the process of getting that approval from the state is that we have to do a couple of things from an administrative standpoint so that they know what our long-term goals are to meet that 8 million gallons a day expansion. Mr. Hatabian's here to talk a little bit about it, but as I see it, there are three distinct items that we have to do. One, and I left my sheet up there, I apologize. One is related to an anti-degradation plan. The other one is related to an environmental information document, and the third is a development design review plan, basically. Those three things have to be done just to get us set up so that we could do some type of facility expansion to go to 8 million gallons a day. They want to know that we can meet their standards as it relates to phosphates and pH balance and discharge and all of that. As I had mentioned to each of you at the retreat, I think it's very important that the city looks at some type of master plan as it relates to our wastewater and water systems. One of the great benefits that the city of Canton has from an economic development standpoint and a residential development standpoint is we provide that utility. We do a pretty good job with that utility. If we want to continue to use that for growth, we're going to have to plan how we're going to treat those capacities. We're already hitting certain limits during certain rainy times of the year at our facilities. And what I would like to propose to council, and Mr. Hatabian is here and he can talk a little bit about it, I would like to propose that we go ahead and go through the process of getting those three items completed outside of a master plan. Those three items are basically just letting us know what we might be looking at if we decide to expand our footprint and our facility at its current location. Having said that, if we go out and we do a master plan, we do a request for proposals or a request for qualifications and get an engineer in here to do a master plan on water and wastewater, they might identify that we need more than 8 million gallons a day in capacity in the long run. We won't know until we get that plan done if we can meet it at that facility. We would want them to look and see if there are other locations that we might have to look at, what the process would be to get at those locations. If we could grow at that location, and if we had to add a second location, or if we needed to move everything into one location, all of that would be brought up at the same time. But a master plan is going to take far longer than it's going to take us over the next year to get those three items done. We currently are working, as you know, with ESI on our wastewater plant project. Because of their knowledge at the site and their knowledge of the existing process, Mr. Hatavian, he can speak to this, believes that it would be to our benefit as the city to engage ESI to go ahead and do those 3 individual items. The cost of that is going to be about $35,000 that we would need to do through some type of demand services contract with them. They would already have a good bit of information on what's going on out there, what we had already done on site to project to get to that next level and where we would need to go. I do know that that the council at times is not very friendly with on-demand services contracts. And having said that, if we decided that we wanted to go out and have another party do it, you're probably looking at a little bit more expense because you're going to have somebody to come in and learn a little bit more about what's there. But if that's the desire of council, that's what staff will do. Mr. Hatavian can talk a little bit more about the process and what's involved with those 3 areas. But we're going to have to do these 3 items to meet the 8 million gallons a day at that existing site. And I would like for the council to really consider the timeline that you would like to see on a master plan for water and wastewater services. Wastewater, Mr. Tavian can second this, wastewater is our primary need. If we had to pick between the 2 systems, the wastewater is the one that we've got to get moving faster. And because of that, if we decide to go out with a master plan, I think it's very important that we make that task number 1, that we make that the expedient part of the master plan. But having said that, we also have an aging water treatment facility, and we're going to need to look at that as well. So I'll let Dave come up and make a few comments, or I'll answer any questions you might have.
I would, what would be wrong with doing the master plan and the development design plan for $4 million all at one time, bidding them out, both together?
Well, we could do that. I think from my perspective, the way I'm looking at it...
Because we're going to do the master plan, I think, anyway.
I think the way I look at it, though, is that we already have an approval from EPD on this particular site to go up to 8 million gallons. If we go ahead and start this process to get all the information together, it's going to give us some scales of what our cost might be to build that particular facility, that particular expansion at that location. Part of the master plan process is going to go ahead and take that into consideration. So I don't think we're going to lose anything by doing that separately and going ahead and getting it started while we're trying to find a comfortable level of working with a consultant on a larger scale master plan.
But could you not gain in the scale of cost because of one firm doing both of them?
You could, but I mean, if we're looking
and you got a year.
If we're looking to expand to 8 million gallons, we're probably looking at about another $30 million at our wastewater plant. $35,000 to let us know that the EPD is going to let us do that on that site. We're going to meet their conditions over the course of a $30 million project. I don't think is going to buy us a whole lot more through a master plan to delay it and have another consultant do it all at once.
Okay. Mr. Grant.
Yes, I'm the Mr. Demand Services poster child, but it makes sense to me that ESI has the knowledge in this instance, and I think we have. Is correct? We have a year to do these 3 studies.
We've got a year.
A year.
A year from March the 2nd.
Okay. Do you know what the average time frame of completing these 3 studies would be?
The sheet that I provided for you, there's 2 different sides to it. One talks about our current flows at the plant. The other gives kind of a timeline. If we went ahead and, say, in May decided to move forward with a demand services contract with ESI, we feel confident that we could have everything wrapped up this fall, even with time in there for EPD to review everything. So that's where, from my perspective, if we went ahead and utilized ESI to get this project done, or if y'all wanted to utilize somebody else, a master plan and getting everything together is probably going to take 12 months, 18 months to pull all together. This is just one piece that we would at least know and be able to hand over to the master plan consultant and say, here's this chunk of information.
Okay. So again, that makes sense to me. I've expressed concerns in the past of having the same firm, doing the design, engineering, and supervision, construction, and design revisions. And this, just is another concern of where oversight comes in this project, and it is a huge project. But again, it makes sense to me in this instance. I do agree we need the master plan, and even if we start simultaneously, what I would not support at all is again, continuing this, one firm doing all of this and making recommendations for future enhancements that then they may, do the design and construction of that also. So I would kind of be comfortable with this only if we talk about this master plan and we have different firms bidding on that, just for oversight reasons and for fresh set of eyes, again, for that reason only. So, but it makes sense that they would do this. So
From my point of view, as it relates to a master plan, when we get ready to do that process, I want to make it very clear to all the firms that are bidding on that master plan, they're only going to be doing the master plan. They're not going to be getting contracts to design the projects. I don't like the idea that somebody can go in on the cheap end to get the work and then maybe they build off of it in the next phase. I think it's very important that the person who designs it, who is doing the master planning process, understands up front that is their sole responsibility, to be that third party, to look at our system, give us the best ideas for having the best system moving forward. Sure, they can give us some information and some concept designs that we might need for particular facilities and locations and things like that, but those individual projects need to be bid out separately.
I agree. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. We have, I believe, let's see, city manager report. Do you have anything?
I have several things.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry. Let me pull out my notepad.
I knew you had one thing, but I...
Oh, no, I have several.
Okay.
First relates to fish at the reservoir. We received a letter from the Department of Natural Resources suggesting that we needed to increase our supply of shad in the reservoir. That cost, we went ahead and got some estimates on that. That cost is about $5,000. The reason I wanted to bring it to you, we technically have funds available in our Parks and Recreation budget to do this. They were not specifically spelled out. In this case, it does fall more to a Parks and Recreation function than a reservoir function because we're utilizing the actual reservoir for recreation programs at our small park out there. But I wanted to bring this to you because if council doesn't want to do fish, then we'll figure out another way. But I think we can afford to do the fish.
Mr. Rust.
Billy, I'm not a fisherman, but I've read these documents and I have some questions. It appears that this fish is not for humans. We're trying to fatten the bass so the bass will be better
Correct.
fish for the fishermen. Here's the concern that I have. It says in one document from Georgia Department of Natural Resources that there's a massive die-off below 50 degrees, and the next document from Custom Outdoor says below 42 degrees. I'm not trying to get you to pull out of your vast pool of knowledge or ask Siri this question or whatever, but here's the real question is, this is a very deep reservoir. It appears to me that, the deeper you go, the colder it gets. It appears to me that 42 and 50 degrees temperatures below those numbers are probably down under. So that means these fish, they said they were forage fish. There are forage fish getting eaten not what they eat, because they can't get to the bottom. For very long periods of time. Maybe they can go down there for a short period of time, but we're really putting them in there to fatten the bass. Is that correct?
And you know, having said that, they're not likely to stay at the face of the dam because that's the deepest area.
I thought it was deep all through. There was like 200 and some feet deep.
There are sections where the original creek bed flows through there.
So
but
they will have places where they can feed.
Absolutely. If you go out into the area, say nearest Great Sky underneath Reservoir Drive, that particular area to the left side of the road is not nearly as deep.
Would you like us to vote tonight? It appears to me also that time is of the essence here because they need to deliver and get them in.
I don't think we need a vote. I just wanted to let you know that we would be taking this out of the Parks and Recreation function.
Would this help to vote, because you'd at least be able to schedule it during a time frame for these fish to survive, have the best chance of survival?
The estimates fall underneath my approval process, but I wanted to bring it to you because it wasn't specifically laid out in the budget.
Okay.
Mr. Goodman.
I am a fisherman, and I'm glad to hear this. Yeah, that'd be a great addition there, I think.
Absolutely. Anyone else? Okay.
Number 2, as you recall at the last meeting, I brought up some concerns about the intergovernmental agreement with Cherokee County on our paramedic training program. Having reviewed it again and having spoken to the other jurisdictions in the county, I don't have the same concerns anymore. I think that, you know, as long as there's an understanding that we're going to cover our own employees, there's some logistics that we can work through there if we have a situation. So I'll be putting this on the next agenda for approval since we've discussed it twice. Good. So I'm going to let you know that.
Just quickly, I remember Bobby going at length about liability, or a lot of questions about liability. That's all been addressed. We're okay with it?
Well, I mean, what we're doing is what all the other cities have done is they basically said, we understand that when you've got one governmental entity working with another governmental entity, there's never going to be a perfect process. But if we'll all agree that we're going to take care of our own people and we're going to insure our own people, and if there's an issue, we're all going to be involved to some extent, it's fine.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Next
item that I have for you, I wanted to let you know that if you didn't read the newspapers, the Downtown Development Authority has under contract the Board of Education site. I do have a signed copy of that contract with me. If you'd like to see it, I'll be happy to email it out to you. We do have an item with the police department where we're going to need to request a budget amendment. One of the things that came forward to us from our audit, if you'll recall, last fall we had approved and appropriated funds for the police department to do the body cameras. For unknown reasons, when the invoice came in from the particular vendor, the invoice was dated after the start of this fiscal year, even though the funds were appropriated in last fiscal year. So we will need to do a budget amendment in the near future for the police department to take those funds out of our reserve, our cash reserve where they weren't spent last year, and add them into their budget this year to cover that expense so that they're in the same fiscal year. The next item I wanted to mention, I had several phone calls as it relates to the traffic signal at Riverbend Way and Knoxbridge Highway. As you recall, there was an automobile accident there with some injuries to a little girl not long ago. I do want to report to the council that the Georgia Department of Transportation is looking again at a study to see if there is a warrant for a light there. I have spoken with the school district. We have spoken with residents out there and concerned parents. The bottom line is that we cannot go and put up a light without the approval of GDOT on a state highway. This will be the second time that they have reviewed this particular intersection in the last 2 years. So there continue to be incidents. Our police department has sent them a list of incidents that we've worked, as has the county and Georgia State Patrol. So we're doing the best we can on that, but again, that falls to the state. I wanted to mention to you that at the next meeting, we will be bringing to you a budget amendment as it relates to the hotel motel tax. After doing some internal review of that particular tax fund, we have some dollars that were in reserve that we need to spend within this fiscal year. In addition, we are going to be raising the revenue estimate for the hotel motel tax. We've had a significant amount of money come in above and beyond what we had budgeted, so that will be coming to you at the next meeting. One item that is being discussed that I wanted to make you aware of is a concern not only that I have, but a concern that some of the other cities in Cherokee County have as it relates to apartments. We have seen a great deal of interest in apartment development within the cities, within properties that could be annexed into the cities. I know that there has been some discussion, at least between city managers, about getting city councils and the county on board with doing a multi-jurisdictional moratorium on apartments until there can be some more solid decisions on growth boundary agreements, until there can be some more solid decisions on proper locations for annexations and things like that. I know that our sister city to the south part of the county is going to bring it up at their meeting on Monday night, but I wanted to bring that to your attention so you wouldn't be surprised if it came out in the newspaper. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on it too. But there are some deep concerns that say if another city decided to put a moratorium in place, that might push all of the development to another city because apartments are able to be financed at the current time. And they become big items. The city of Canton has a number of apartment units already in place, and the last thing we would want is for another city to put a moratorium in place and that create more pressure for us. Likewise, we don't want to create more pressure for someone else. That's the backbone behind looking at some type of multi-jurisdictional moratorium.
Could I just ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Before you bring that, or sometime, could we do some kind of study to see the occupant rate for apartments? You know, are the apartments that are already in Canton, are they full? Are they half full? How is that?
We can make some phone calls.
Yeah, let us know about what the rate is for occupancy of apartments.
Sure. We'll be happy to look into that. Yes, sir.
Billy, if an apartment project's already been approved, typically in a moratorium, that would be grandfathered in. You couldn't affect that.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So when we do look at it, we probably need to know what we've already got coming, regardless.
And what this moratorium would really relate to is rezonings for multifamily, annexations for multifamily, so that there is some understanding between the cities and the county as to what we feel like are the appropriate places for that growth to take place.
Thank you.
And then the final item I wanted to bring to you, because I did have a citizen ask me to do this, there has been a concern raised in one of our neighborhoods that the city of Canton should be enforcing OSHA requirements as it relates to building inspections. I did tell the individual that I would bring it up to the council. Currently in the state of Georgia, local governments and the state government don't enforce OSHA. The federal government does. We don't have a state program. If the council would like for us to look into doing that, I'm happy to do that, but I kind of wanted to see a head shake as to whether or not that would be the position of the council. I will make sure that individual resident understands that. Thank you very much. I don't have anything else.
All right. And neither, I think you've covered everything very well there. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All members voting for the motion.